The first thing Captain Jean-Luc Picard saw was the wound in space. It hung on the main view screen like a vertical scar, a slice of black that was somehow darker than the surrounding void, edges shimmering with violet light, as if reality were trying and failing to stitch itself closed. The bridge of the Enterprise hummed with controlled tension, consoles murmuring, air thick with ozone and quiet breathing. Somewhere below that, like a bass note only his nerves could hear, was the memory of another impossible shape in space. A Borg cube, a different wound that had once taken his name and his face. "Report," he said, and his own voice sounded too calm in his ears. Data's fingers moved in a blur over ops. "The anomaly is a localized subspace disruption, Captain. Spatial shear is high but stable for the moment. I am detecting a single object emerging from the rift." Worf leaned forward, tactical, eyes narrowed. "Object is humanoid, sir. No life support systems. No vessel." Picard's jaw tightened. Humanoid. In hard vacuum. Drifting from a tear in reality. The universe never tired of its little ironies. On screen, the figure tumbled out of the violet glare like a discarded toy. No suit, no visor. A man in a blue bodysuit, emblazoned with a stylized crest on his chest. Cape trailing like a torn banner in the dark. His arms were slightly outstretched, as if he had been flying towards something a moment ago and found only nothing. "He should be dead," Crusher breathed over the open comm from sickbay. Picard's fingers curled around the armrests. "Mr. Data, can we transport him?" "Affirmative. There is no detectable environmental shield, but his vital signs are unusual. Strong. Very strong." Data glanced up, golden eyes reflecting data streams. "If we do not act, the anomaly is destabilizing. It will close within 31 seconds. 31 seconds to decide whether to save a stranger who defied physics simply by existing." Picard stood.
"Lock on and beam him directly to sickbay. Energize."
The wound in space flickered, then folded in on itself like a sigh. The view screen showed only stars again, cold and distant, but Picard's skin prickled as if something immense had brushed past the ship and moved on. He saw the man more clearly under the white light of sickbay. Kal-El, the man would later call himself, though in that first hour his name was only a soft exhale on lips cracked by exposure that should have ruptured them. His skin held a faint bronze hue, unmarked, unburned, as though the vacuum had been no more hostile than a summer breeze. The suit was a deep blue, textured like some alien weave, with a red and yellow crest shaped like an angular S. The cape pooled on the biobed like a field of dried blood. Dr. Crusher's instruments whispered quietly around him and mostly gave up. "His cellular structure shows energy densities far above human baseline," she murmured, rehearsing objectivity to keep awe at bay. "No frostbite, no tissue damage. He is breathing in an oxygen-nitrogen mix like ours, but if his readings are accurate, he doesn't need to." Picard stood with hands clasped behind his back, the stance he wore when he was trying not to fold his arms over his chest defensively. On the opposite side of the bed, Data tilted his head, studying the stranger with the thoughtful focus of a painter considering a new color. "His musculature is extraordinary, Captain. Theoretically, he could exert forces well beyond the structural limits of this vessel, yet he lies very still." As if on cue, the man's fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes a clear, unsettling blue, the color of an Earth sky Picard had not seen with his own eyes in far too long.
For a moment, the man stared at the ceiling, disoriented, pupils adjusting to artificial light, to gravity that hummed under the deck. Then he turned his head, taking in the people around him, the silver instruments,
the view of space through the small port. He moved like someone used to great strength and careful with it. "This isn't Metropolis," he said, voice low, roughened but steady. American accent, Picard noted automatically. Terran English, mid-21st century by the sound. The man focused on him, and Picard had the odd impression of being weighed, measured, and not in terms of threat. "No," Picard replied. "This is the Federation starship Enterprise. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard." A flicker, confusion, a shard of recognition at the word Enterprise that did not quite fit this ship this time. "Federation," the man repeated slowly. He tried to sit up. The biobed hissed as Crusher made an abortive gesture to restrain him, then thought better of it. He rose as if simple gravity were optional. "Name?" Picard asked. "Superman," the man answered by reflex, then seemed to correct himself inwardly, a faint softening at the corners of his eyes. "Kal-El. My parents called me that, on Krypton." The name dropped into the sterile air like a stone into still water. Data's head tilted further. "Krypton is not in our stellar charts, Captain." "It wouldn't be," Kal said. His gaze drifted to the stars beyond the port, searching for a pattern only he knew. "It exploded, a long time ago. I was sent away as a child. I grew up on Earth." He paused, as if listening to his own words from a distance. "A different Earth, I think. Your sensors, your ship. This isn't my universe, is it?" Picard felt a subtle shift in himself, old instincts waking. The diplomatic calm, the philosopher's dread at how fragile the words, "my universe," could be. "No," he said quietly. "I suspect it is not." For a heartbeat, they simply regarded each other. Two men from wildly different mythologies, both old in their own ways. Behind Picard, Data cleared his throat, a learned human gesture. "Mr. Kal-El," he said, carefully choosing. "Your survival in vacuum, your cellular energy profile, your ability to sit up after prolonged exposure to subspace shear, these indicate capacities beyond normal humanoid parameters. May I ask, are you invulnerable?" Kal gave a faint, weary smile that did not reach his eyes. "I can be hurt. It just takes more work." He looked back at Picard. "I understand chain of command, Captain. I've worked with organizations before, governments, leagues. I won't cause trouble." He hesitated. "But if people are in danger, I won't stand by. That's not something I can change about myself." The simplicity of the statement carried with it a kind of quiet weight, like a vow spoken too many times to ever be light again. Picard felt the Prime Directive stir in the back of his mind like a stern voice, talking of non-interference, of not using power as a blunt instrument. He also heard the memory of screams, of cities burned by entities with power and no conscience. He inclined his head. "On this ship," he said, "we are guided by principles as well. We will see if we can find a way home for you. In the meantime, you are a guest, not a prisoner. We will have much to discuss." Kal's shoulders eased, barely, as if some internal tension released by a fraction. "Discussion," he echoed softly. "That I can do."
They spoke at length in the ready room later, with the stars streaming by in quiet rows. The room smelled faintly of tea and old paper, sensory ghosts of Picard's private rituals. Kal stood by the viewport, arms folded loosely, cape falling in a red line to the deck. He was watching the warp field's blue shimmer with a kind of childlike focus, as if each photon carried a new rule of this universe. Picard sat behind his desk, fingers steepled. A pad lay between them, displaying an outline of Federation law and the Prime Directive. "In my world," Kal said slowly, answering a question Picard had not quite finished asking, "I was raised by farmers in Kansas. They taught me that power isn't a license, it's a burden."
You don't pull up the corn to make it grow faster. You don't pick up a tractor to show off. You use what you have when people need you, and you stop when they don't. He turned, leaning against the sill, those blue eyes catching the room's light. "But I also worked with governments who thought that because I could do something, I should. Or that I could be pointed like a weapon." "Weaponization of the extraordinary is a familiar temptation," Picard said. The words tasted of past wars, secret projects, locutus. The Federation was built in part to resist that temptation. We have rules. The Prime Directive, no interference with the natural development of other cultures, exists because good intentions can destroy as efficiently as malice. Kal nodded. "I understand. On my Earth, I learned that every time I saved one person, I might be changing 1,000 lives downstream. But when you hear someone screaming, it's hard to think in abstractions." His voice dipped, a shadow crossing his features. "I've made mistakes, moved too fast, hit too hard. I'm not here to break your laws, Captain. But I need you to know that if a choice is between a doctrine and a life, I don't always pick the doctrine." Picard regarded him over folded hands. There was no arrogance in the statement, only a kind of weary honesty. The man was not boasting of heroism, he was confessing the limits of his own restraint. He opened his mouth to answer, and the comm chirped. "Bridge to Captain Picard," Riker's voice came, edged with urgency. "We are receiving a distress call from the surface of Tessin 3. Picard tapped his badge. "Picard here. What is their situation, number 1? "Colony reports multiple gravity mines seeded around their primary habitats," Riker said. "They're destabilizing the tectonic plates. Casualties already in the hundreds, thousands if those mines detonate." Picard's throat tightened. Tessin 3 was a young Federation world, its people only just beginning to build cities under an unfamiliar sun. "Understood. I am on my way." He cut the channel and rose. Kal had already straightened, posture shifting toward alert readiness. "Let me go," he said. "I can handle mines, disasters. I've done it before." Picard shook his head automatically. "We cannot intervene on a planetary scale without careful assessment. The Prime Directive, this is a Federation colony." Kal cut in, not rudely, but with insistent clarity. "They're your people. There's no cultural contamination here. Just people buried under buildings they trusted to stand." The argument was solid. The law, for once, aligned with the impulse. What remained was fear. Not for the colonists, but for what unleashing this man might mean. Data's description of his potential still echoed in Picard's mind. Structural limits exceeded, force beyond calculation. Yet he looked at Kal now and saw not a weapon, but someone who had learned to move through fragile worlds as if holding glass. "Very well," he said after a beat. "You will accompany an away team under Commander Riker's authority as a civilian specialist." The compromise tasted bureaucratic, but it gave form to what they both needed. "You will follow Starfleet orders and minimize your display of unusual capabilities, unless absolutely necessary." Kal gave a small, grim smile. "I can live with that. Just point me where the ground is going to break." The air on Tessin 3 tasted of dust and ionization. Riker's boots crunched on fractured stone as the away team materialized in the colony's central square. Buildings leaned drunkenly against one another, their foundations undermined by invisible forces. Children cried somewhere beneath rubble, their voices thin and high. The sky had a faint green tint from the planetary field generators trying to compensate for the tectonic stress. "Scan for the mines," Riker ordered, tricorder already in hand. Data swept the device in a precise arc.
"Gravity distortions emanating from 12 locations, Commander. Depth varying between 15 and 40 meters. They are programmed to generate progressive shear stress in the planet's mantle." "They're tearing the world apart," Kal said quietly. He hovered half a meter above the cracked pavement without seeming to notice, eyes unfocused as he listened to something beyond sound. "I can feel the pull, like hands trying to twist the core out of shape." He knelt, placing his palm against the ground. To Riker it looked like any other man touching dust. But Kal's expression changed, muscles tightening along his jaw. "You see it?" Riker asked. "I hear it," Kal answered softly. "In the stone." The first mine was buried beneath what had been a school. The building sagged inward, its roof caved, walls spiderwebbed with fissures. Children's drawings fluttered in the hot wind, bright colors already dulled by dust. The colonists had formed a desperate bucket line, passing chunks of debris hand to hand. Kal approached slowly, cape brushing the ground. A woman cried out as another tremor shook the earth, almost toppling them. "We don't have time," she gasped. "The ground!" "We will stabilize it," Riker said. "This is Commander Riker of the Enterprise. We're here to help." The woman nodded, dazed. Kal moved past the line, and Riker felt a prickle of unease. "Remember, minimal display," he murmured under his breath. Kal glanced back, understanding flickering across his face. He took a breath, then exhaled and deliberately dropped back to the ground, letting his boots feel the weight. "I'll move as fast as I can without scaring them," he said softly. Then he walked into the ruins. To the colonists, it may have seemed that he simply dug more efficiently than any man had a right to. He lifted beams that would have crushed a shuttlecraft and set them down as gently as wounded birds. He slid through gaps that should have sheared skin and bone and emerged without a scratch, carrying a child tucked against his chest as if she weighed nothing. Dust caked his hair, his suit, his cape, turning bright colors into muted pastels. But his movements remained controlled, almost reverent. Beneath the school's deepest foundation he found the first mine, a metallic sphere the size of a small shuttle, humming with a gravity that made the air around it feel syrup thick. The closer he got, the heavier his limbs became, as if some invisible hand were pushing him backward. Kal's teeth clenched. Krypton had had gravity like this, relentless, unyielding. For an instant he remembered a world he had never walked on, a sky he had only seen in simulations. "Data," Riker's voice crackled in his ear. "Can we defuse it?" "The device appears to be Romulan in origin," Data replied. "Its control matrix is encoded.
Attempting to access remotely risks detonation.
So we move it, Kal said, fingertips brushing the hull. The force pressed against him, a steady push that would have flattened steel. He leaned into it, muscles singing with strain, and slowly the sphere lifted, breaking free of the earth that resisted letting it go. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Careful," Riker warned absurdly. "You drop that and we—" "I'm not going to drop it," Kal grunted. He carried the mine out, step by deliberate step, past gaping colonists who watched a lone figure hauling a star's weight as if it were a stubborn plough. He took it to the designated clearing, where a transporter lock shimmered it away into space, to be jettisoned beyond the system. 11 more times he did this, in different corners of the colony, under the eyes of a people who did not yet understand what they were seeing. The Romulan warbirds decloaked when the last mine vanished. They slid into view above the colony like knives, their green hulls reflecting the strained sunlight. On the Enterprise's bridge, Worf's hands flew across tactical. "2 warbirds, Captain. Weapons powered."
They are hailing us. Picard stood, jaw set. On screen. Tomalak's face appeared, sharp and amused, framed by Romulan architecture that always looked to Picard like weapons pretending to be walls.
"Captain Picard," Tomalak purred, "I see you are interfering with Romulan ordnance." Picard's gaze was cold. "You have seeded gravity mines on a Federation world, Tomalak. This is not ordnance. It is an act of war." Tomalak smiled thinly. "Do not be melodramatic. The devices were intended as a test and bait. We were seeking a particular prize." His eyes flicked towards the surface as if he could see through rock and atmosphere to the figure standing amid rubble below. Kal had joined Riker atop a broken platform, watching the sky darken with Romulan silhouettes. He could feel the artificial gravity wells above, the latent threat stitched into their hulls. "He means me," Kal said quietly. Riker's jaw clenched. "Let him keep wanting." "He has a fleet," Kal replied. "You have a colony, and a ship full of people who don't regenerate the way I do." On the bridge, Tomalak continued. "We have records, you see, Captain. Fragments of legends from a parallel timeline. A man in blue who could lift mountains. The Romulan Star Empire has use for such a specimen. Turn him over, and we will consider this unfortunate incident resolved." The bridge went very still. Riker's hands curled on the railing. Worf's lip curled. Picard's nostrils flared with a slow, controlled breath. "You refer to our guest," he said evenly. "He is under Federation protection. We do not turn over sentient beings as property." Tomalak's eyes hardened. "Then your colony will learn how fragile tectonic plates can be when properly stimulated." Picard could feel the weight of hundreds of lives pressing on the space between his shoulder blades. He had seen this game before. Coercion by threat, lives as bargaining chips. The Prime Directive had nothing to say about it now.
This was straightforward sovereignty and cruelty. Before he could reply, another voice slipped into the channel. "Captain," Kal said, standing in the open with the sky boiling green above him. The comm carried the background noise of the colony, weeping, the groan of settling stone. "Put me on." Picard hesitated, then nodded to Worf.
Tomalok's image split to make room for a second window showing Kal on the planet below. Dust streaked his suit, a smear of blood on his cheek from some falling rock he had not bothered to dodge. He looked up, meeting Tomalok's gaze through the miracle of subspace. "You wanted me, right?" Kal said. His tone was conversational, almost gentle. "Here I am." Tomalok's lips curved, interested. "So the legend speaks. You are ready to accept Romulan custody?" "No," Kal said, "but I'm willing to talk." He glanced sideways as if to Picard, though he could not see the bridge. "If I go to them voluntarily, they have less reason to fire on you, and less reason to push the planet any further." Picard's stomach tightened. "This is not your decision alone," he said quietly. "You are not a bargaining chip either." "I know," Kal answered. "But I'm the only one here who walks away from point-blank disruptor fire." He looked back at the sky. "Tomalok, I'll come, under one condition." Tomalok arched a brow. "You are in no position to bargain. You're about to get the most powerful test subject you've ever seen," Kal said calmly. "You can afford one concession. You leave this colony alone. Permanently. You withdraw your ships and do not return. No more mines, no more tests. You have me. That's enough." The Romulan considered him, eyes reflecting unreadable calculations. On the bridge, Picard could almost hear the probabilities shifting in that alien mind. A single subject of immense value versus a long-term campaign of destabilization. "Very well," Tomalok said at last. "We accept your surrender. Beam to our coordinates. Alone." "Kal," Picard murmured,
aware the channel was open. "You do not have to do this."
Kal smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, though there was sadness in it. "Where I come from, we call this Tuesday," he said lightly. Then his voice softened. "Captain, I respect your rules, I really do. But sometimes the fastest way to save lives is to step outside of them for a minute." He looked straight at the pickup. "Trust me to come back." That was the heart of it, Picard realized. Not just a question of tactical advantage, but of trust. Whether to believe that this man, with power beyond anything on his crew, would choose to remain aligned with them once out of their reach. Trusting power had never ended well in his experience. But he also remembered that he had once begged to be trusted himself, through the lenses and tubes of Locutus. It had mattered. He inclined his head, the smallest of nods. "We will be here," he said. "Do what you must." Moments later, in a shaft of golden transporter light, Kal-El vanished from Tesson 3 and rematerialized aboard the Romulan flagship. The Romulans were not imaginative jailers. They placed him in a cell with invisible force fields and ornamental shackles that hummed with artificial gravity. They trained disruptor rifles on him from behind shielded ports. Sensors probed his biology from every angle, data streams cascading across green-lit consoles. Tomalok watched from an observation gallery, hands folded behind his back, eyes gleaming. "The restraints generate localized gravitational spikes," he observed. "By all accounts, they should crush your bones, Superman." "By all accounts," Kal said through gritted teeth. "You've never met me." The weight was real. He could feel it pressing into the marrow,
a familiar echo of Krypton. The shackles tried to drag his arms down, to force him to kneel. His muscles shook with the effort of staying upright. He could have broken them easily if he allowed himself the full expression of his strength. But he did not. Not yet.
He needed them to believe, for a moment, that their systems had teeth. Scientists murmured as they read the feeds. Energy absorption off the charts, one said. Cellular lattice is self-reinforcing. Another. Imagine what the Empire could do with an army of such beings.
Kal closed his eyes briefly. He had heard variations of that sentence from too many mouths. When he opened them again, Tomalok was closer, standing just beyond the field. "You offered yourself to us," the Romulan said softly. "Why? Do not insult me by claiming altruism. Even your kind must understand self-preservation." "You look at me and see a weapon," Kal said. "I look at your ships and see 2 orbital platforms aimed at people who haven't even rebuilt their homes. If staying here means they sleep tonight, I can live with a few tests." Tomalok studied him, then smiled in a way that made the hair on Kal's arms rise. "You misunderstand. Staying here will not protect them in the long term. Having you will. The Empire faces threats you cannot imagine. The Borg, the Dominion, the Federation itself. You will help us secure our future." He gestured to the shackles. "Or we will take what we require without your cooperation. We have time." Kal looked down at his hands. Within, energy coiled patiently, sunlight stored in molecules. He could feel the field frequencies, the harmonics of the artificial gravity, the way the shackles were anchored to the deck plating. It would be so easy to turn that energy outward, to end this conversation with a single decisive motion. But bodies near him were fragile. Circuits could overload, consoles explode. Romulan soldiers, Romulan scientists, sentients who had chosen their path but might still be capable of different choices someday, would die. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if testing the fit of a glove. "You have time," he echoed. "I don't." He moved. The shackles shattered with a sound like mountains breaking. The localized gravity spikes flared,
Then collapsed as their anchors ripped free of the deck. The force field shrieked briefly as his fist met it, its glow intensifying, then fragmenting into a lattice of sparks that rained down harmlessly. Disruptors fired, green beams slamming into his chest and shoulders. They stung, a sharp, hot pressure that reminded him of standing too close to a rocket's exhaust. He stepped through them. One by one, carefully, he knocked rifles aside, squeezed them until their power cells discharged in harmless bursts against the ceiling, shoved soldiers out of the line of fire rather than into it. The scientists dove for cover as consoles overloaded, showers of sparks turning the air acrid. Tomalok stumbled back, eyes wide, as the man he'd thought to cage walked through his weapons as though they were heavy rain. Kal stopped just short of the observation window. He could have punched through it. Instead, he reached up and tapped it with one knuckle, gentle as a teacher asking for attention. The glass quivered. "This is me being polite," he said quietly. "This is me holding back. Remember that when you think about coming after that colony again."
Tomahawk swallowed. For the first time, a flicker of something very close to fear crossed his features. "You will not always have such advantages," he said, voice strained. "There are forces in this galaxy that dwarf even you." "I know," Kal said. "I've met some of them. They usually start to look small once you see them up close." He straightened. "Beam me back, Captain," he said into the air. "I think we're done here." On the Enterprise, Picard had been circling the bridge like a caged animal, torn between arming photon torpedoes and holding his line. At Kal's words, he snapped, "We have his signal. Lock on." Tomahawk's protests came too late. In a column of blue-white light, Kal-El vanished from the Romulan ship, leaving behind broken restraints and a silence heavy with calculations.
The warbirds lingered at the edge of sensor range for a tense few minutes, then turned and slid back into cloak, their retreat tactical, their eagerness blunted by the knowledge of what they had just failed to bind. Peace, in space, is never more than an interlude. It lasted 4 days. On the 5th, the Borg cube arrived. Picard felt it before the sensors spoke. A vibration in the bones, an old trauma reawakened. He was in his quarters when the red alert klaxon shimmered through the ship, a hollow sound that seemed to detach him from his own body. His feet carried him to the bridge on reflex, each step echoing with memories of being led instead of walking. When he stepped onto the bridge, the view screen was already filled with it. A massive geometrical monstrosity, all angles and shadows, gliding through space with indifferent purpose. A Borg cube, studded with sensor blisters, conduits snaking along its surface like metallic vines. The ambient hum of its engines reached them even across the vacuum, translated by sensors into a subsonic tremor in the deck. Worf's voice was flat. "Borg cube on intercept course, Captain. They are hailing us." Hailing, Picard thought distantly, was not their style. On screen, the face that appeared was not a face at all but a composite, a shifting mosaic of features, male, female, young, old, all pallid, all marked by implants and tubes. The voices layered into one, the collective speaking through many mouths. "We are the Borg," it said. "Your vessel contains biological and technological distinctiveness previously unassimilated. We will add your uniqueness to our own. You will not resist." Picard's hands were cold. "We have encountered you before," he said. "We will resist." The eyes in the mosaic turned slightly, focusing past him, as if peering through the hull. "Kryptonian genetic pattern detected," the Borg said. "Solar energy absorption and output parameters. Exceptional. You are a valuable resource." Picard's stomach dropped. They could sense Kal-El's presence aboard, his unique biology ringing through space like a beacon. "You will be assimilated," the Borg continued. "We will adapt." The channel cut without ceremony. Torpedoes from the cube flashed out, slamming into the Enterprise's shields. The deck lurched, consoles flared, sparks spat into hot metallic air. Picard gripped the railing. "Return fire!" he snapped. Phasers lanced out, carving glowing scars into the cube's surface, but it was like scoring stone with a fingernail. The Borg adapted in seconds, their shields reconfiguring. Impacts bled away into nothing. "We cannot maintain a direct exchange, Captain," Data said.
Our shields will fail first. Kal arrived on the bridge just then, breathless in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "Borg," he said tightly. He looked at the cube with the expression of someone staring at a house fire crawling toward a gas line. "We have our own history with them back home too." Picard's head snapped around. "You faced them?" "Not like this," Kal admitted. "But enough to know they're relentless. They don't stop until you're part of them." He swallowed, throat working. "I can't let that happen, Captain. Not to your crew, and not to me. You've seen what I can do. Imagine that multiplied by thousands and wired into some cold machine mind." Picard had imagined. That was what turned his stomach. It wasn't only fear of physical destruction, but of what the Borg would make of someone like this. An endless engine of power, stripped of conscience, fused to their will. "You have a plan?" he asked. Kal nodded slowly. "Their coordination depends on a central data nexus. In your terms, a vinculum. If we can insert a disruptive signal there, a virus, it scrambles the collective's sense of self, gives each drone a chance to be separate, even briefly. That's how we beat them once, in my world." Data's eyes brightened with fierce interest despite the danger.
"We have similar theoretical models," he said. "Admiral Janeway developed such a pathogen. I can adapt the concept to our current situation."
His fingers danced across his console, calling up old files Picard still had mixed feelings about. "We would need direct access to the cube's internal systems." Kal looked back at the screen, at the intricate tangle of corridors and conduits barely visible in sensor overlays. "Then I go inside," he said. "You keep them busy. Once I plant the virus in their vinculum, you get as many of your people as you can away. The drones, they're not just parts, they're captives. If we can free them even for a second, it's worth it."
"They are also the ones trying to kill us," Worf rumbled.
Kal nodded. "I know, but I've been mind-controlled before. I remember what it felt like to watch my own hands do things I'd never choose." His gaze flicked to Picard pointedly, and for a moment the bridge seemed to constrict around the shared ghost. Locutus. Clark under some alien influence, it didn't matter. Being used was a universal horror. Picard exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, each word like stepping into cold water. "Mr. Data, prepare the viral program. Mr. Worf, target their weapons systems and prepare to give Mr. Kal-El as much of a distraction as we can. Kal." He looked the man squarely in the eye. "Our goal is not annihilation. It is liberation and survival. If you cannot do both, you prioritize my crew. You hear me?" Kal's jaw tightened. "I hear you," he said softly. "I'll do everything I can without becoming the thing we're fighting." He straightened. "I'll need a transporter lock near their vinculum, somewhere with structural access." "Coordinates coming online," Data said. "I will maintain a sensor lock on your position as long as possible." The ship shook again as another volley struck. "Then let's do this," Kal murmured, more to himself than anyone. He felt the familiar tingle of the transporter lock,
The disassembling of his atoms into shimmering potential. For a heartbeat, he existed as information, as a pattern. Then the cube swallowed him. The interior of the Borg cube was a graveyard lit by surgical lamps. Dark corridors hummed with the sound of distant conduits, the whisper of mechanical air. The walls were a lattice of blackened metal and pulsing green lines, conduits carrying fluid and data in equal measure. The smell, if vacuum could have a smell, was of cold oil and dead circuits, with an undertone of something biological left too long in refrigeration. Drones stood in alcoves along the walls, motionless, plugged into the collective through thick cables and spinal implants. Their skin was grey, their eyes either hollow or replaced by glowing optics. Kal materialized in a junction where 3 corridors met, the floor beneath his boots vibrating faintly with the cube's heartbeat. His stomach clenched. He had faced machines, tyrants, gods. But the Borg were something else. The erasure of the individual elevated to a sacred mission.
Kal-El? Data's voice came through the small communicator they had improvised for him. You are approximately 200 meters from the vinculum node. I am uploading a map to your auditory cortex via microsonic cues. Subtle, nearly inaudible clicks punctuated Data's words, directing him left, right, straight. Time to target, 90 seconds if you maintain current pace. Copy, Kal murmured. He moved quickly but carefully, not wanting to disturb the drones more than necessary. They watched him pass with a dim, disinterested awareness, like animals sensing a storm they'd been trained to ignore. As he approached the central node, the cube shifted. Red light suffused the corridor, bathing the metal in a lurid glow. Kal felt it immediately. A draining weakness, like someone had quietly cut a vein he could not see. His limbs grew heavier, his breath shallower. The ambient hum of solar energy in his cells dimmed.
"Data," he said through gritted teeth. "Something's wrong." "They have erected a localized radiation field," Data replied, calm, analytical. "Spectrum analysis indicates it is tuned to simulate red solar output. Your primary energy source has been neutralized." Kal leaned against the wall, fingers digging into the metal. Red sunlight. Clever bastards. Of course they had studied him the moment they detected his signature. The Borg adapted. That was their nature. He forced himself forward, each step now an effort. It felt like being slowly buried under wet sand. A drone turned toward him, eyes whirring, implants gleaming. "You will be assimilated," it said, reaching out. Its arm ended in a surgical tool that glistened with nanoprobes. Kal caught the wrist, but his grip lacked its usual certainty. The arm still stopped, but only barely. "Not today," he said, voice strained. Another drone emerged from an alcove, then another. The corridor filled with grey bodies, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Data," Kal hissed. "Working as quickly as I can, Captain." Data's voice filtered through, tense in its own way. On the Enterprise, his fingers flew, rewriting protocols, forcing the virus into a form the Borg could not easily filter out. On the bridge, the cube's weapons hammered at the ship relentlessly. "Shields at 40%, Worf reported, voice tight. "Hull breaches on decks 5 and 6, contained for now." Picard stared at the cube on the screen, jaw set. Somewhere inside that black geometry, a man was pushing against his limits not just of strength, but of restraint. "Find me a way to hit them where it hurts," he said softly, "without losing ourselves in the process." In the cube, Kal reached the chamber.
The vinculum hung in the center like a grotesque chandelier, a cylindrical construct festooned with cables and data conduits. It pulsed with a sickly green light, each heartbeat a collective thought. His knees trembled as he crossed the threshold.
The red radiation field was strongest here, pressing on him from all directions like an invisible ocean. His vision edged with grey. "I'm here," he whispered. His hand shook as he reached toward the central panel. "Uploading now," Data said. A small device on Kal's belt beeped and deployed slender filaments interfacing with the Borg hardware. Code flowed, alien and fluid, slipping into the vinculum's data streams like a drop of ink in water. The cube shuddered. Drones staggered mid-step, heads jerking as the collective's unity vibrated under the assault. Kal smiled grimly. Then a surge of red light flared. The Borg had identified the threat and were responding in the only way they knew. More power, more control. The red field intensified to a crushing force. Kal's legs buckled. He went to one knee, then two, palms slamming to the deck. It was like being back under Krypton's sky without the hope of ever taking off. "You cannot succeed," a dozen voices said in unison, drones closing in. "Your uniqueness will be added to our own. Your resistance isn't optional," Kal gasped. His arms shook violently. He could feel his cells starving, the stored energy burning away too fast. The virus had started, but without sustained input, the Borg might isolate and contain it. He needed time. The cube would not give it. On the Enterprise's bridge, Data looked up suddenly, eyes widening. "I have identified the source of the red solar field," he said. "It is being generated by an external emitter node on the cube's ventral surface. If we can disrupt it, even briefly, Kal-El should regain partial access to his strength." "Our weapons are not penetrating their shields," Riker reminded him. "We would have to get very close, and even then—" Picard's gaze went to the tactical overlay, to the position of the node relative to their own. A terrible, beautiful idea formed. "What if we don't shoot it?" he said slowly. "What if we hit it?" Riker stared. "You mean ram the cube?"
"A controlled impact," Picard said. The idea tasted of every instinct he had tried to cultivate against recklessness. Not enough to destroy either vessel, but enough to destabilize the emitter's alignment. Our deflector shields and structural integrity fields can handle a glancing blow. The Borg's configuration is more brittle where the node protrudes. Worf's eyes gleamed with a warrior's grim appreciation. "It is possible," he said. "It is also extremely dangerous." "So is every alternative," Picard replied. He could feel Starfleet protocol glaring at him from the back of his mind, but this, at least, was his choice. No unseen god, no admiral's directive. Just a captain deciding whether to risk his ship to save one man and thousands of enslaved minds. "Helm," he said, "adjust course. Prepare for collision with the ventral emitter node at quarter impulse. All hands, brace for impact." The inertial dampeners screamed silently as the Enterprise swung toward the cube, a sleek saucer and nacelles aiming themselves at an angular monolith older than many of her crew. On the view screen, the cube grew, filling their world. "Distance, 10 kilometers. 5, Data counted. Picard gripped the armrests. "Steady."
The moment of contact was less an impact and more a shuddering protest from the fabric of both ships. The deflector shield flared, phaser scars glowing white-hot as they ground along the cube's hull. The emitter node crumpled inward like tin, its delicate arrays snapping. A burst of red light exploded outward, scattering into space like embers extinguished before they could land. On the cube, the field collapsed.
Kal felt it like a sudden breath in drowning lungs. One moment, his muscles screamed under a foreign weight. The next, something bright and familiar pierced the red haze. The cube's hull had been scarred by earlier phaser strikes, microfractures allowing slivers of real starlight to leak in. Not much, just the barest whisper of yellow photons. Enough. Energy surged into his cells, tentative at first, then building as if some internal dam had broken. He straightened slowly, every vertebra remembering what it meant to stand against gravity instead of under it. The drones reached for him. Their implants whirred, nanoprobes glinting. He caught the nearest wrist with renewed certainty, the metal of the tool bending under his grip. "Round 2, he said hoarsely. "My rules." The virus in the vinculum flared at the same time, fed by the restored connection through his device. Data's code slipped deeper, worming through subroutines, seeding chaos. Across the cube, thousands of minds twitched. Fractures appeared in the collective's perfect chorus. A drone dropped its surgical instrument, eyes blinking rapidly as if waking from a long sleep. Another clutched its head, a strangled noise escaping its throat. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, some of them remembered their own names. The cube's power output spiked wildly. Systems not designed for individual panic tried to process it, feedback loops forming. The structure began to shake. "The cube is destabilizing, Captain," Data reported. "Internal power surges throughout. Containment of the vinculum is failing. We have approximately 80 seconds before catastrophic overload." Picard's chest tightened. "Kal-El," he said, "you must get out of there, now." In the heart of the cube, Kal looked around the chamber, at the drones stumbling, at the vinculum pulsing like a diseased heart about to burst. "There are thousands of them in here," he said. "If the cube blows with them still inside..." All this was for nothing. His voice hardened. "I can get them out." Riker stared at the comm channel as if he'd misheard. "All of them? You can't be serious." 79 seconds, actually, Data corrected, unable to keep himself from precision even now. Kal smiled without humor. "I've moved faster." He moved. What followed could not be measured in normal terms. Later, when the Enterprise's sensors tried to reconstruct it, the logs would show only blurs, streaks of motion, anomalies in space-time around the cube's inner corridors. To Kal, inside that storm, each second fractured into 100 usable fragments. He ripped drones from their alcoves, tearing cables with just enough force not to take their spines with them. He punched new exits where bulkheads blocked his path, metal blooming outward like petals in high-speed reverse. He gathered unconscious bodies in bundles, cradling them as gently as if they were children, and carried them toward points where the Enterprise's transporters could get a lock through ruptured hull plating. "Data!" he barked between breaths, words a machine gun rhythm. "Open every transporter you've got. Lock onto anything with Borg implants in the zones I mark. Don't argue about contamination. We can figure that out later." "Understood," Data replied,
his own fingers blurring. Coordinating now. Medical teams to transporter rooms 1 through 5. Repeat, all medical teams. Dr. Crusher was already running, cursing under her breath as beds and biobags were wheeled into the transporter rooms. On the surface of the cube, fist-sized holes appeared in quick succession, each one accompanied by a stuttering beam of light as clusters of drones flickered away. Kal moved at speeds that made the concept of step meaningless. He was everywhere at once and nowhere for more than the blink of an eye. 3 drones in a corridor, slack-jawed from the virus's assault. He scooped them up, shoulders brushing the walls in passing.
12 in a hangar bay, still locked in alcoves. He smashed the clamps, wrapped them in sheets of torn conduit, dragged them toward a breach where starlight spilled in. A drone looked up at him as he paused for half a heartbeat, its one organic eye focusing.
"Who?" it croaked, voice raw.
"You," Kal said. "You're you again. Hold on."
Then he was gone, leaving the word "you" echoing in a mind that had forgotten singular pronouns. 79 seconds. The cube's core screamed. Energy arced along conduits, lighting them like veins. Systems tried to vent, to adjust, but the virus had scrambled the command hierarchy. What had once been a choir now resembled a riot. On the Enterprise, transporter rooms blazed with activity. Drones materialized in tangled heaps, some convulsing, some limp. Medical staff swarmed them, hyposprays hissing, restraints applied where necessary. One former Borg vomited on the pad, black fluid and bile. Another simply sobbed without tears, eyes staring at a ceiling not filled with wires for the first time in decades. "How many?" Picard demanded. "Current count, approximately 4,300, Data answered. "Continuing transport. Kal-El is extending our reach by physically moving drones closer to hull breaches." "Deck 23 reports overload on pattern buffers," Riker shouted. "We're burning out our systems." "Burn them," Picard snapped. "Replace them later. Keep pulling them out." In the cube, Kal's muscles began to burn in a way they almost never did. Even with his strength returning, the sheer repetition, the precision of holding back just enough not to hurt those he was rescuing, tore through him. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the protests of his own body. A drone slipped from his grasp, falling toward a collapsing catwalk. He dove after it, catching the broken body in a rush of wind and twisted metal. "Got you," he muttered, more to himself than to the unconscious form. Time bent, warped by velocity and adrenaline.
He lost count of the runs, of how many times he raced from one end of the cube to the other, leaving only pressure waves and the shimmer of transporter locks in his wake. Somewhere in the blur, he realized he had stopped distinguishing between enemy and victim. They were all just bodies in the path of a coming fire. 79 seconds later, the floor heaved under him. "Kal-El," Data's voice cut through the roar. "We have reached maximum safe distance. The cube is entering final overload. You must exit now." Kal looked around the corridor he stood in. If stood could apply to a moment suspended between motions. A handful of drones still remained, slumped in alcoves or lying in corners where he hadn't yet reached. His chest constricted. He could try for one more run. 2. But each would steal from the last seconds he needed to get out. He thought of the colonists on Tesson 3, of Tomalak's hungry eyes.
of Picard's quiet, relentless morality. Of the thousands already aboard the Enterprise, breathing air that did not stink of cold oil. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the ones he would not reach. It was the kind of apology he had made too many times for disasters too big for any one man to fix completely. Then he moved. He ran not toward another drone, but toward the largest breach he could reach, punching the last bit of weakened hull between him and open space. The stars exploded around him as he burst from the cube's flank like a bullet. Behind him, the cube finally died. From the bridge, they saw it blossom. The structure swelled, corners bowing outward, internal energy tearing through conduits like lightning through dry wood. For a heartbeat, it glowed, a sickly green sun in miniature. Then it shattered, chunks of hull spinning away, debris fields streaking past like murder confetti. Shockwaves rippled through space, making the Enterprise shudder even at a distance. In the midst of the expanding debris, a small figure tumbled. A blue dot with a red streak.
"We have him," Data said, relief bleeding into his mechanical cadence. Locking onto his signal now. "Energize," Picard ordered. Kal materialized in sickbay, then promptly collapsed. When he woke, the light was softer. The ship hummed with the low, exhausted contentment of a crew that had survived something it might not entirely understand yet. He lay on a biobed again, leads attached to his chest, an IV in his arm more out of habit than necessity. His muscles felt like they had run all the way around the world twice. His cells thrummed with the chaotic afterglow of overuse, like a battery overloaded and then abruptly unplugged. Dr. Crusher hovered at his side, tricorder in hand. "You Kryptonians," she muttered without looking up, "are terrible patients." He smiled weakly. "We aim to please." His voice was a rasp. She snorted, then met his eyes. "You burned through almost every reserve of solar energy you had stored," she said. "From what I can tell, your cells were seconds away from catastrophic failure. We're lucky your physiology is as redundant as it is." "How many?" he asked. The question had formed in his throat before he even knew he would speak. Crusher's expression softened. "We've counted just over 7,000 individuals transported from the cube. Some in better shape than others. Many are still unconscious. Some may not survive the trauma of separation. But they're here, alive, not Borg anymore, or at least less Borg." Her gaze flicked towards the far end of sickbay, where a row of beds held pale, half-mechanical forms. Nurses moved quietly among them. "You did that? In 79 seconds." Kal let out a breath that shook slightly. 7,000 wasn't everyone. It never would be. But it was 7,000 people who might someday remember their own names again. It would have to be enough. The doors hissed open. Picard entered, uniform slightly rumpled, lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a week ago. Data followed, Posture perfectly straight, but his gaze lingering on the reclaimed Borg, as if they were a mystery that mattered more than any equation. Picard approached the bed then, after a brief hesitation, did something he rarely did. He placed his hand lightly on Kal's forearm, a gesture of wordless acknowledgement. "You saved my ship," he said, "and thousands of people who the rest of the galaxy had already written off as lost. Kal shifted, wincing. "I didn't do it alone," he said. "You rammed a cube. That's not exactly regulation." Picard's mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile. "There are times," he conceded, "when regulation must bow to necessity. Starfleet Command will no doubt have opinions. They usually do." He paused, eyes searching Kal's face. "But there is a difference between reckless power and power used with restraint." He glanced toward the recovered drones. "You could have destroyed that cube outright. Instead, you chose the harder path." Kal looked at his own hands, the slight tremor in them. "I've destroyed things when I didn't have to," he said quietly. "Build up enough of those and you start to wonder if you're helping anyone at all. Here, you gave me a framework, rules, a line I could aim to stay on the right side of." He met Picard's gaze. "That matters." Data stepped closer. "I observed that, despite your capacity, you consistently limited your force to just above what was necessary," he said. There was something like admiration in his precise tone. "This suggests a highly developed internal ethical subroutine." Kal huffed a small laugh. "I call it a conscience." "Conscience," Data repeated, as if testing the word. "I have been seeking to understand that phenomenon for some time. Watching you, I believe I may have made incremental progress." Kal smiled more fully now. "I'm glad someone's getting something out of all this." Picard straightened slightly. "Starfleet Command has been apprised of the situation," he said. "In light of your actions at Tessin 3 and against the Borg, they have formally designated you an Allied Special Asset. That is, in less bureaucratic terms, a friend." He inclined his head. "You are not under arrest. You are not a specimen. You are welcome aboard my ship as long as you choose to remain." Kal's throat tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you," he said. 2 simple words, laden with the weight of all the times he had been seen as something else. "I'd like to stay, at least until we figure out how to send me home." He looked out the small viewport where stars drifted slowly. "If there is a home to send me to, universes are messy things." Picard followed his gaze. "We will devote what resources we can to studying the anomaly that brought you here," he said. "But in the meantime, there is work to be done right here. Worlds to protect, lives to defend, problems that cannot be solved with phasers alone." He looked back at Kal. "We would be honored to have your help." Kal nodded. "I'm not used to working under someone else's flag," he admitted. "But if I've learned anything, it's that lone heroes burn out fast. Maybe it's time I tried being part of a crew." "A crew is more than the sum of its parts," Data offered. "Even exceptionally powerful parts." Kal chuckled. "Then let's see what we can be together." Later, when the emergencies had settled into routines and the newly freed ex-Borg were asleep or sedated, when the Romulans had slunk back into the shadows to reconsider their strategies, when Starfleet's messages had been acknowledged but not yet answered, Picard found Kal in the observation lounge. The man stood by the long window, cape falling in soft folds, hands clasped behind his back in an unconscious mirroring of Picard's own habitual stance. The stars stretched ahead, an infinite scattering of possible futures. "Penny for your thoughts,"
Picard said, stepping up beside him. Do people still say that in your century? Kal smiled faintly.
Where I come from, yes. You're a few hundred years late, but I'll allow it.
He nodded toward the stars. I was thinking about power. Funny how that never seems to go out of style.
Picard followed his gaze. Power corrupts, he said quietly. At least, that is the old saying. I have seen it proved true often enough.
Maybe, Kal replied, but so does fear. So does trying so hard not to hurt anyone that you end up letting the worst people do whatever they want.
He exhaled.
Back home, I spent a long time trying to decide which was worse, using everything I had and risking becoming a tyrant, or holding back and watching people die.
There is no simple answer, Picard said. Our Prime Directive tries to codify caution. But, as we have seen, there are circumstances in which strict adherence becomes a different kind of crime. He glanced sidelong at Kal. Today, you held the lives of 7,000 beings in your hands. You could have chosen the efficient solution. Destroy the cube, end the threat, and accept the collateral loss as inevitable. Kal's jaw tightened. I couldn't, he said. Not after seeing them up close. They weren't the Borg as an abstract. They were just people, trapped inside something they never asked for. I don't know if I saved all of them. I know I didn't. But I couldn't define acceptable loss in numbers, only in the lives I could touch. Picard studied him for a long moment. Power, he said slowly, is not defined by what it can destroy. Any fool can break things given enough force. True power is measured by what you refuse to break, even when it would be easier. By the choices you make when no one could stop you from doing otherwise. Kal looked down at his hands again, flexing his fingers as if testing their weight. Back in Kansas, he said softly, my father used to say that being strong doesn't make you right. It just makes it harder to be wrong without a whole lot of people getting hurt. Some nights,
I'd hear him praying that I'd never have to find out which was stronger, my fists or my conscience.
He glanced at Picard.
He'd like you. You talk like him.
Picard felt a small, unexpected warmth at that. Then I am honoured, he said. They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching warp stars stretch into lines. Data joined them eventually, hands folded, head tilted as if listening to some distant melody only he could hear. I have been reviewing the events aboard the cube, Data said. The probability of extracting exactly 7,000 drones within the allotted 79 seconds, given the constraints, was approximately 0.004%. Yet you succeeded. Kal shrugged slightly. I've never trusted the odds, he said. They don't know about stubbornness. Data considered this. Stubbornness, he repeated. Another human trait I do not fully understand, but which appears to significantly skew outcomes. It's like gravity in Kansas, Kal said. Always there. You just learn to lean into it. Picard smiled, the expression small but genuine. Welcome to the crew, Mr. Kal-El, he said. Or do you prefer Superman? Kal watched his own reflection in the viewport for a moment, the crest on his chest, the man behind the symbol. Out here, he said quietly, I think Kal is enough.
Titles can wait. Right now, I'm just a man trying to do the next right thing. The Enterprise sailed on, a fragile arrow of light in a vast, indifferent dark, carrying within it a captain who believed in rules, an android learning to feel, and a man who could tear stars apart and chose, instead, to hold worlds together. Between them, in the quiet hum of the warp core and the soft breathing of 7,000 newly liberated souls, an unwritten agreement took shape. That power would be questioned, guided, restrained. That heroism would be measured not in explosions, but in the lives left standing afterward. Somewhere behind them,
the ashes of a Borg cube drifted through space, a monument to the choice they had made. Somewhere ahead, other anomalies waited, other wounds in reality. But for this moment, between the ticking of cosmic clocks, there was only the ship, the stars, and 3 figures at a window, contemplating the burden and the grace of being strong in a universe that never ran out of things to break. 2 months after the cube, the days started to blur, not because nothing was happening, but because too much of it was the same. Reports, simulations, debriefings that circled the same questions like vultures over a corpse. What the rift had been, how it had grabbed him, whether it could be recreated without tearing something else apart. Data ran models in the background of almost everything he did, processing more variables in a minute than most labs could in a year. Every week he brought Kal a new set of numbers. The probability of locating an identical subspace configuration remains low, he'd say gently. However, projected time frame for a viable approximation is 3 to 4 months, assuming continued computational resources. 3 to 4 months. It was meant to be hopeful. To Kal, who measured time in heartbeats he could hear half a planet away, it sounded like a sentence. He tried to be patient. He helped where he could as a civilian consultant, listened when Picard needed an outside perspective, sparred with Worf in the gym, and pretended not to notice the way the Klingon always swung a little harder when conversation drifted toward honor and restraint. He walked the corridors at ship night, the lights down to a soft blue, listening to the quiet breathing of 1,000 people asleep in a metal tube between stars. Somewhere beyond this universe, Martha was probably worrying why Clark hadn't called in a while. He wondered if time ran the same there. He wondered if a version of Lois still looked up at Metropolis's sky and felt something missing without knowing what. He wondered if they were already holding funerals. He tried not to wonder what would happen to him if Data's 3 to 4 months turned into 6, then 12, then never. The Federation would never put that in a report. Deep Space Nine broke the monotony like a punch of colour in a grayscale dream. From the shuttle window, the station looked like something a paranoid artist would sketch. Arcs and spines curling around a central hub, hanging over Bajor like a question no one wanted to answer yet. Runabouts drifted like insects. The wormhole out past the docking pylons opened and closed in slow, luminous breaths that made the hairs on the back of Kal's neck prickle. It reminded him too much of the rift that had spat him here. Sitting across from him, Picard held a pad with the conference agenda. His face was set in its diplomatic lines, but Kal could hear the undertone in his heartbeat.
the slight uptick every time his eyes flicked to the word intervention. "You don't have to drag me to this one," Kal said, trying for humour. "I can stay on the ship, practice not breaking holodeck simulations." Picard lowered the pad, mouth curling just barely. "You are not being dragged," he said. "You're accompanying me as a civilian advisor. A symbol, whether I like that or not." "Symbols don't get a vote," Kal replied. "They just get held up until somebody needs a target." Picard watched him for a moment. "How's the waiting?" he asked quietly. "Data tells me he's made incremental progress." "Incremental," Kal said. "That's a scientist's way of saying we can see the mountain more clearly from the base." He shifted, shoulders brushing the shuttle's bulkhead. "I know he's doing everything he can. This is the longest I've spent not actually living anywhere. It turns out being homeless at interstellar scale feels a lot like being homeless in Kansas. Just colder." Picard set the pad down.
If at any point it feels as though we are treating you as a sample rather than a guest, I need you to tell me," he said. "I give you my word, Kal. Starfleet's intent is to send you home, not keep you in a box."
"I believe you," Kal said. The words were true and still heavier than he liked. "It's the rest of Starfleet I'm not sure about." Picard opened his mouth to answer, but the docking clamps kissed the hull and DS9 swallowed the conversation. The promenade was noise and motion and 1,000 smells layered over each other. Alien spices, coolant, spilled synthahol, incense from a tiny Bajoran shrine tucked between a tailor's shop and a bar that hummed like a hive. To Kal, it was an assault and a distraction. He walked half a step behind Picard, hands in plain view, no cape, just a dark jacket and the blurred lines of a man trying not to draw more attention than he already did. It didn't work. Whispers chased them. He turned the volume down in his head, but fragments still slipped in.
"That's him, the one from the cube. I heard he pulled people out of the collective with his bare hands. I heard he tore it apart. I heard he looks like that because he manipulates gravity around his own muscles. I heard.
Commander Sisko met them near the centre of the promenade, arms folded, expression like a storm on the horizon. He shook Picard's hand with genuine respect, then offered his to Kal. "Clark Kent, right?" he said. "Or do you prefer Kal-El?" "At this point I answer to anything that isn't weapon," Kal said, taking the hand. Sisko huffed something that lived in the neighbourhood of a laugh. "On this station," he said, "I prefer my weapons where I can see them, and my guests to stay guests. We'll see how good I am at that." He led them towards the turbolift. As they moved, Kal let his hearing bleed a little into the ambient noise. Here, the lies were layered differently than on the Enterprise, heavier with old occupation, fresh resentment,
Backroom deals over ale. Somewhere under the deck, a Ferengi accountant muttered about laundering latinum through a Bajoran charity. Somewhere on an upper ring, a Vedic asked in a shaking voice why the prophets had let the Cardassians leave instead of making them pay. Somewhere quieter still, behind a bulkhead thick enough that no one meant to be overheard, someone said his name in the tone people used for classified material. "Subject Kal-El remains aboard the Enterprise," a calm voice noted. "Projected timeline for spontaneous rift recreation
now revised to indefinite, pending new data. Starfleet Council prefers to keep expectations appropriately managed. Another voice. Meaning? The first, with the faintest hint of amusement. Meaning they're getting comfortable with the idea that he's theirs for the long haul. Cal's hand tightened around the rail. He almost missed Cisco asking him something about quarters. He forced his attention back, but the words lingered like smoke. The conference itself was a slow bleed. The room was crowded with uniforms and civilian robes, flags and badges, and carefully neutral expressions. They talked about borders and refugee flows, and when, exactly, it was morally acceptable to cross a line on a map to keep a war from spilling over. Kal stood along the back wall, officially security, unofficially a reminder. Every time someone said overwhelming force, a few heads tilted toward him as if to make the concept easier to picture. His hearing slid through the speeches and found the private tracks underneath. A Bolian delegate silently rehearsing how he would spin a compromise as a victory. A human admiral thinking, if we had him 20 years ago, Wolf 359 would be a footnote. A Vulcan observing that integrating a being of such potential into a strictly regulated hierarchy was logically untenable in the long term. When Picard spoke, Kal listened harder. The captain's arguments were measured, his metaphors old and tested. He spoke of the Prime Directive like a scar he'd learned to live with, not a shield. When the session finally adjourned for a recess, Kal slipped out, ostensibly to stretch his legs. In truth, he needed a hallway with fewer lies. He found instead a shadow waiting for him that had done its homework. The corridor outside the wardroom was dimmer, one of those liminal spaces stations produced by accident. A maintenance hatch sat half open, humming softly to itself. Past it, leaning with casual ease against a support strut, stood a man in black and grey, his uniform regulation, his posture not. Dark hair, sharp lines to his face, eyes like scanners. He smiled as if they'd already been introduced. "Mr. Kent," he said, "or Kal-El, or Superman if we're being theatrical. I'm Luther Sloan. I work in a section of Starfleet that prefers to live between the lines." Kal stopped just out of comfortable conversational range. "Between the lines," he repeated. "Is that what they're calling doesn't officially exist these days?" Sloane's smile warmed without heating. "You've heard whispers," he said. "That's good. It saves time. Section 31, since we're dispensing with pretense. No charter, no logo, no inspirational speeches. Just a mandate. Keep the Federation alive in a universe that is not politely waiting for it to succeed." Kal leaned a shoulder against the opposite bulkhead, mirroring Sloane without meaning to. "Let me guess," he said. "This is the part where you say you're not my enemy, you're just pragmatic." "I wouldn't insult you with clichés," Sloane replied. "I will tell you I'm impressed. You've done things in the last few months that we once relegated to hypothetical threat assessments." He tilted his head. "How's the portal research going? Data's 3 to 4 month estimate still holding?" Kal kept his face still, but he felt something cold drop through his chest. "You've been reading his logs," he said. "We read everything," Sloane said.
It's how we stay ahead of surprises. The thing about indefinite timelines is that, functionally, they're indistinguishable from never. You must feel that. Kal thought of long nights staring at the bulkhead in his quarters, listening to the Enterprise breathe like a sleeping animal.
Data's the smartest being I've ever met, he said. If anyone can figure it out, he can. Of course, Sloane said. But intelligence doesn't alter politics. Think about it. You show up out of nowhere, demonstrate the ability to cripple a Borg cube, save a colony, manipulate gravity like you're changing tires on a tractor. You expect an organization built on fear of the unknown to rush to send you away? He let the question hang. Starfleet is not malicious, but it is cautious, conservative in the oldest sense. You are a data set they haven't finished mining. Going home, for them, is a lower priority than mapping everything you can do. Picard isn't like that, Kal said. It came out faster than he meant. Sloane's gaze sharpened. I agree, he said. Picard is an outlier, old-fashioned in some ways. He genuinely wants to help you. That's part of why you're still around. But captains answer to admirals. Admirals answer to councils. Councils answer to fear. Fear likes its weapons where it can reach them. He pushed off the strut, took a step closer, hands open at his sides. I'm not telling you this to alienate you from your friends. I'm telling you because you're old enough to know when you're being handled. You're not a child to be soothed with timelines. So what are you offering? Kal asked. The truth? Sloane's smile turned rueful. No one can afford that. What I can offer is context and opportunities. There are problems out here that can't wait for subcommittees. You are uniquely equipped to solve some of them. We can point you at the ones that matter. You mean the ones that matter to you, Kal said. Ideally, those align, Sloane replied. When they don't,
That's when we find out who you really are.
He found out sooner than he liked. The first sensor flag on Viridia 4 came 3 days later, when the Enterprise had left DS9 but stayed within a hair of its patrol corridor. Data reported it in his usual even tone. Anomalous mortality rates on a pre-warp world under low-level anthropological observation. No sign of external interference. In the observation lounge, a holographic representation of the planet hung in the air, dotted with red where deaths had spiked. Crusher's voice was tight as she explained the virus. Airborne, adaptive, lethal. Picard's fingers steepled under his chin. Kal didn't look at the model. He was staring past it, out the real window at the real sphere, and past that, with senses no sensor pod could match. He heard Viridia before anyone said its name aloud. The coughs came first. Ragged, tearing, layered over each other until they blurred into a rough static like sandpaper against glass. Beneath them were prayers in languages he didn't know but recognized anyway. The shape of a plea was universal. Mothers bargaining with gods, fathers promising impossible trades, children calling for people who wouldn't answer. He saw flashes when he let his vision adjust. Overcrowded huts, bodies laid out in rows, hands brushing fevered foreheads with herbs that did nothing. Estimated mortality without intervention, Picard asked. Data's answer was clinical. 40 to 60% within 60 days, Captain. Societal cohesion would likely collapse. Technological and cultural development would be set back at least several centuries. Cause? Picard pressed. Natural evolution, Data said. A zoonotic jump from a native animal population into the dominant species. There is no sign of artificial manipulation. Natural. That word should have comforted Picard.
It made Kal want to punch through the glass. Crusher's jaw worked. "We could design an antiviral," she said. "One day in sickbay, maybe 2,
And we'd have something we could disperse from orbit. They'd never even have to see us." Picard's eyes closed briefly. "And when their myths start telling stories about healing rains from the sky?" he asked. "When they begin to expect salvation every time the weather shifts? We have records of what that does to a culture. We also have records of plagues that wiped out whole species because no one did anything," Crusher shot back. "Isn't the Prime Directive supposed to be about respecting life, not watching it burn?" Kal's hands were flat on the table now. He hadn't realized he'd moved them. "They're not abstractions," he said softly. "I can hear them." Picard looked at him, really looked, and Kal let him feel a fraction of what pressed on his senses. "They're calling it a curse," he said, "a punishment. Their priests are telling them to accept it. Their doctors are cutting themselves open to try to find what's wrong inside." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the hollow emitters. "Jean-Luc," Crusher whispered, "if we don't help, they'll die thinking their gods hated them." Picard's face was carved out of old decisions. "The Prime Directive exists precisely for times like this," he said, more to himself than to them. "When our compassion urges us to act without considering the long-term consequences. We are not gods. We cannot become responsible for every tragedy we detect." Kal almost laughed. It came out like a short, bitter breath. "You think you're not responsible because you close your eyes?" he asked. "Captain, with all respect, when you have the ability to do something and choose not to, that's still a choice." Picard met his gaze. "If you want me to say this feels right, I can't," he said quietly. "I hear them too, in my own way. But I also hear the weight of every mission where we intervened and made things worse. We are caretakers of our principles as much as our neighbors. If we break this rule, we do it as a polity,
Having reckoned with what it means. Not because one man cannot bear to listen,
Kal looked away. It wasn't the wrong argument. That made it worse. "Understood," he said. The word felt like swallowing gravel. Sleep didn't happen that night. He lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, Viridia's soundscape playing on the inside of his skull, coughing, weeping, the dull, heavy thud of bodies lowered into shallow graves. He tried every trick he'd learned as a teenager to tune out the world, counting heartbeats on the Enterprise, focusing on the warp core's constant thrum. But the dying were louder. Somewhere in the noise, like a note held too long on a string instrument, Sloane's voice slid in over a secured channel so tight even the ship's computer didn't flag it. "They're up to 30,000 dead," he said conversationally. "I thought you might be keeping count." Kal didn't bother asking how he had the number. "Spying on a pre-warp world doesn't violate the directive?" he asked instead. "Observation is permitted," Sloane replied. "Intervention is the tricky part. Speaking of which, I notice you haven't done anything yet. Captain Picard must be persuasive." "He's consistent," Kal said. "He believes rules matter, especially when they hurt." "And you?" Sloane asked. "Do you believe you were put under this yellow sun just to stand by while 400 million people roll the dice on their genetics?"
Kal swung his legs over the side of the bed, put his feet on the floor. Solid. Familiar. "You already tried this once," he said. "Show me a wound and hand me your bandage." "I'm not handing you anything," Sloane said. "I'm offering you a choice you don't get in the wardroom. Cargo Bay 2. 10 minutes. If you decide to stay in your bunk, that's a choice too. You'll just have to live with it longer." Cargo Bay 2 smelled like metal and dust and the faint ozone of recent transport. The lights were low, most of the space taken up by crates. In one corner,
Partitioned off by a portable field generator, sat a sleek grey container that hummed like something trying not to be noticed. Sloane waited beside it, hands in his pockets, the picture of a man who had all the time in the world. "You came," he said. "I was curious which version of you would win, the farm boy who believes in rules, or the alien who hears a whole planet drowning." "I'm not interested in your pop psychology," Kal said. "Show me what you dragged on board my ship without telling its captain." Sloane tapped a sequence on the container. The lid slid aside, revealing transparent cylinders filled with faintly glowing liquid. Kal's vision cut through glass and shielded layers, zoomed in on the contents. Viruses, engineered and efficient. Retroviral vectors carrying payloads that looked like antiviral agents. And something else. Tags glowed in his sight, sequences of nucleotides that didn't match anything in the Viridian genome. "Vaccine," Sloane prompted. "Distributed in the upper atmosphere, bonds to the pathogen, cripples its replication. We can wipe the plague out before it wipes them." "And?" Kal asked. "And what?" "And this," Kal said, focusing on a repeating motif. "A receptor keyed to a subspace frequency. You built in a remote trigger." Sloane didn't even try to deny it. "A failsafe," he said. "If Viridia survives, they become a new node in the galactic network, one we could nudge if they start getting ideas that conflict with Federation security." "You mean you'd own them?" Kal said. His voice came out flatter than he intended. "A whole civilization with a kill switch." "Influence is not the same as ownership," Sloane said. "We wouldn't be steering their every move, just ensuring their worst impulses don't become our problem. You've seen what happens when unregulated powers start expanding. Do you really want another Dominion with a better PR department?" Kal closed the lid with more force than necessary. The hum muffled. "You call yourself the immune system," he said. "This is cancer." Sloane sighed as if disappointed. "I was hoping your time in our universe would have cured you of binary thinking," he said. "It's not good versus evil out here, Kal. It's ugly versus uglier. You could stop this plague and get in on the ground floor of a partnership that might save us all a lot of blood later. Or you can keep your conscience spotless while Viridia's villages fill up with corpses." "Those aren't the only two options," Kal said. "Says the man who can move mountains," Sloane replied. "Fine. Show me the third way." Kal stepped back from the container. "I won't lace their DNA with your leash," he said. "If I help them, it'll be with something that leaves them as free as they are sick. This stays here." Sloane's eyes cooled. "You realize, of course, but whatever workaround you're thinking of will still be an intervention," he said. "Picard will still be displeased."
He can be angry with me, Kal said. He can be disappointed. He can write me up in his log as the moment the directive started fraying. I'll live. They might not. Sloane studied him, then nodded once. You really are an inconvenient man, he said. Go ahead. Paint clouds with starlight or whatever it is your people do. I'll watch. And when the admirals want to know who broke their favourite toy, I'll make sure your name is spelled correctly.
He chose an observation blister with a clear line of sight to Viridia, a tiny bowl of transparent aluminium jutting into space. He stood there, alone, the ship around him a dull thrum. Below, the planet turned slowly, its clouds pale in starlight. He exhaled, letting his own fear bleed out with the breath. Microheat vision wasn't something he'd practiced much back home. There had rarely been time to be that subtle. Here, he needed the opposite of his usual blunt force. He narrowed his focus until the twin beams leaving his eyes were invisible to normal sight, nothing more than gentle warmth. He sent them across the gap, past the hull, through vacuum. At that distance, every fraction of a degree mattered. He aimed at the high atmosphere, at bands of ice crystals streaking around the equator. The equations from Krypton's terraforming research rose in his memory like ghosts from a library his fingers would never touch again. Convective thresholds, latent heat of fusion, cascade models. He used them like a farmer uses weather lore, nudging the system where it was already ready to move. A fraction of a degree more here, a fraction less there. Towers of cloud thickened, updrafts strengthened, drawing more moisture into ascending plumes. He feathered his vision across them, seeding pressure differentials small enough that no Starfleet meteorologist would be able to tell where coincidence ended and intent began. At the same time, he listened, not to the people now, but to the microscopic drama in their soil and water, the chemical chatter of bacteria, the enzymes they produced. He found a particular enzyme in a harmless soil microbe that, in small amounts, degraded the protein the virus needed to bind to cells. It existed already, scattered and weak. He encouraged that microbe's cousins living high in the atmosphere, bathing them in just enough warmth to make them bloom, their byproducts seeding the forming rain. It was delicate, infuriating work. His eyes burned.
At one point, a trickle of blood slid down his cheek. He wiped it away with the back of his hand and kept going. Hours blurred. He held the pattern until the weather machine below him grabbed the reins, spinning his perturbations into a self-sustaining shift. Clouds darkened. Lightning flickered. Then the first drops fell. He felt them hit roofs and fields and bare skin. He heard the surprise first, the way a shout changes when it becomes laughter. Then the coughing, still there but with a new syncopation as some lungs started to clear instead of clog. Somewhere, a healer stared at a patient whose fever broke too quickly to make sense. He stepped back, blinking spots from his vision. Elegant, Sloane's voice murmured over the secure channel. No fingerprints, plausible deniability. If I didn't know better, I'd call it a miracle. Kal leaned both hands against the viewport, breathing slow. If anyone asks, you can tell them nature got creative, he said. Tell them it was a statistical anomaly, a fluke, a blessing, whatever helps them sleep. And you? Sloane asked.
Do you sleep better now that you've saved them without technically breaking the rule? Kal didn't answer. He wasn't sure. The reckoning came faster this time. Picard called him to the ready room with a tone that didn't need words. On the desk, a hollow image of Viridia's cloud cover rotated slowly, overlaid with Starfleet's analysis. Unusual temperature shifts, unexpected rain patterns, decline in viral load. Meteorologically remarkable, Picard said, not looking up. Statistically improbable, inexplicable unless one posits an external influence. Kal stood at ease in front of the desk, hands clasped behind his back like the officers he'd watched. I didn't deliver any technology, he said. I didn't beam down medicine or talk to them. I changed how warm some air was. Their planet did the rest. Picard lifted his gaze. There was anger there, but it was aimed inward as much as at Kal.
You defied a direct order, he said quietly. You circumvented the chain of command. You chose to interpret the Prime Directive in a way that suited your conscience and hoped the universe would accept your semantics. Are you asking if I think I did the right thing? Kal asked. Because I don't know. I know I did the only thing I could live with. Silence stretched. Outside, the stars continued their indifferent drift. Finally, Picard exhaled. From one perspective, he said, what you did is a model of minimally invasive assistance. From another, it's the first step down a slope we've spent centuries trying to avoid. What happens when the next Superman decides that cloud seeding isn't enough, that he's justified in rearranging continents? Where do we draw a line that you haven't blurred? Maybe the problem, Kal said softly, is writing rules for a universe where people like me don't exist, and then pretending we can still follow them exactly when we do. Your directive was built around ships and phasers and non-interference as an achievable ideal. I can hear people screaming on worlds you haven't even named yet. If I start ignoring that because it makes the rules easier, what does that make me? Picard's expression shifted, a flicker of something like grief. Human, he said, or at least like the rest of us, forced to choose between imperfect options. He rubbed his temple. Starfleet Command has been notified. There will be inquiries. Some will argue for measures to ensure you cannot act unilaterally again. Kal thought of the container in Cargo Bay 2. They already have measures, he said. The closed hearing on DS9 felt less like justice and more like theatre. A handful of admirals, some flag officers, Sisko, Picard, and a few civilians who made notes and occasionally whispered to each other. Viridia's altered weather spun over the centre of the table. Words like precedent and dangerous asset and evolving doctrine floated in the air.
Kal stood against the wall again, not quite at attention, not quite relaxed.
He let the debate wash over him, catching only the parts that mattered. Who wanted him leashed? Who wanted him gone? Who wanted him weaponized? Picard argued fiercely for trust over fear. Sisko, more blunt, pointed out that the universe didn't care about their doctrinal purity. Sloane was not in the room. That alone told Kal how close the knives were. Recess came like a mercy. People shuffled out to refresh their coffee and adjust their talking points. Kal stepped into a side corridor to breathe. That was when the pain hit. It started as a sour note in the ambient hum of the station,
a frequency his body recognized before his mind did. His stomach turned, his muscles tightened. He turned toward it like a plant turning away from a toxin, and found himself facing a narrow service corridor branching off the main one. At the end of it, near a junction of conduits, sat a small device on the deck, open casing revealing a dull green glow. Kryptonite. Artificial, but close enough. Standing a few meters beyond it, hands folded, was Sloane. "You're earlier than I expected," Sloane said. "I was curious how far away you'd feel it. The Borg data suggested high sensitivity. Nice to have that confirmed." The radiation licked at Cal's bones like ice. His breath hitched. "You brought this onto a civilian station," he said, "because that's what defenders do. Poison the environment." Sloane's tone stayed mild. "We screened for leaks," he said. "We're not monsters. The field is tightly contained. You're the only one it's hurting." He nodded at the device. "A rough prototype. Synthetic kryptonite, phase-linked to emitters we can tune. Once we calibrate it properly, we'll be able to deploy it as needed. Think of it as balance." Kal took a careful step to the side, feeling for the edges of the field. Every movement was effort now, like wading waist-deep through wet concrete.
"You could have just walked into the hearing and suggested building a cage," he said. "Saved yourself the trouble of smuggling glowing rocks."
Sloane's mouth twitched. "You overestimate Starfleet's appetite for obvious solutions," he said. "They like their illusions. Section 31 provides reality. That sometimes requires unilateral research." He took a step closer to the device. Cal's knees buckled for a second before he forced them straight. "I'm not here to kill you," Sloane added. "Killing you would make you a martyr. I'm here to see what you do when you're hurt and cornered. Do you lash out? Do you target the person causing you pain? Do you think?" His eyes were cool. "My superiors want to know if you're a controlled burn or a wildfire." Cal's instinct screamed for forward motion. Rush the device, smash it, grab Sloane and ram him into the bulkhead until something gave. He'd done that dance before, under red skies and in rooms where the man across from him wore Lex's face. Here, civilians slept above him in fragile compartments. Here, the bulkheads were full of life support. Here, the slightest miscalculation would hurt someone who didn't even know this conversation was happening. He forced himself to breathe. The kryptonite's pull got worse the closer he moved toward it. Running straight at it would only drop him into its center. He looked up, letting his gaze flick for a heartbeat toward the ceiling. Ventilation grill, power conduits, junction boxes. He didn't have his usual wealth of options, but he still had some. "You're confessing to using a banned radiological weapon on a Federation station," he said, buying half a second. "Do you ever get tired of assuming you'll be the one writing the history?" "History belongs to survivors," Sloane said. "I make sure we're among them. You can hate the methods, but you benefit from the results." "Funny," Kal said. "That's what tyrants always say right before the statues go up." Then he moved. Not forward,
but sideways and up in the same blurred motion, skimming the edge of the kryptonite's worse intensity instead of diving into the middle. Pain flared like white noise. He bit it down, kicked off the wall,
hit the ventilation grill with enough force to rip it free. The metal panel spun in the air. Before gravity and the radiation dragged him down, he snapped his wrist and sent the grill tumbling into the open casing of the kryptonite device. It struck the crystal, jarred the emitter alignment. The containment field, detecting an imbalance, rerouted power inward to prevent a breach. The glow dimmed by half. The radiation's grip on him loosened from a vice to a cruel hand. He slammed into the deck, caught himself on one hand, sucked in air that felt a fraction less poisonous. Sloane's brows lifted. "Nicely done," he said. "You didn't go for me. You went for the system. That's instructive." His hand dipped toward his belt, fingers closing around a small injector. Kal saw the motion in the stretched-out space Payne created. He could have lunged at Sloane's arm. Instead, he used the lesser gravity here. Stations always had little imperfections, and the returning strength in his muscles to kick off the deck, intercepting the injector with 2 fingers before Sloane could bring it up. The device vibrated, charged with something ugly. Sloane let it go as if he'd never really wanted to use it. "Now what?" he asked. "You drag me into the hearing, tell the council their comforting nightmare about Section 31 is real, and expect them to thank you?" Footsteps echoed down the main corridor. Security, drawn by field fluctuations the station's computers had finally flagged. Sisko's voice in the mix, sharp. Kal heard Picard, too, not far behind, heart tripping a little faster. He had a second to choose his narrative. He held up the injector as Sisko and 2 guards rounded the corner, phasers half raised. "Commander," Kal said, voice steady despite the residual ache.
This man brought a synthetic radiological source aboard your station without clearance and used it on me in a live test.
Sisko's gaze took in the device, the grill, the injector, Sloane's calm face, Kal's pallor. Anger settled over his features like a storm front. "You want to explain that?" he asked Sloane. "Who approved your little science project?" "There are clearances you don't have," Sloane said smoothly. "Need to know. I was calibrating a containment unit for exotic particles, using our friend here as a reading for how certain fields interact with his biology. Risk was minimal. Results could be crucial if he ever turns on us." "You ran an unauthorized experiment on a sentient being in my corridors," Sisko said. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "Without consent." "Consent is flexible when the stakes are high enough," Sloane said. "Ask any emergency surgeon." Picard arrived then, breath a touch short, eyes taking in the scene with one sweep. He went still when he saw the green glow. Something like guilt flickered across his face. A man confronted by the physical embodiment of every contingency he'd refused to plan. "Luther Sloane," Kal said, giving the name shape in the air. "Section 31. Sisko's eyes narrowed. "I've heard stories," he said. "Shadow ops, silent wars, ghosts in our own machine. I don't like ghost stories." He stepped closer to Sloane, close enough that, for once, Sloane had to tilt his chin up. "You don't get to bring your ghosts into my house and turn my station into your lab." Sloane's pleasant mask didn't crack, but the temperature behind his eyes dropped a few degrees.
"Commander," he said, "I know you've seen what happens when we're not ruthless enough. You fought a war the Council barely understood. You know the luxury of clean hands is bought with someone else's stains." "Maybe," Sisko said, "but at least I know whose blood is on mine. I don't outsource that to people who hide behind non-existent charters." Picard's voice slid in.
Soft as a knife. "Whatever mandate you think you have," he said, "you do not have the right to treat Kal-El as property, nor to introduce a substance like that into a Federation facility without oversight." He looked at the crystal, then at Sloane. "You are not the soul of the Federation, Mr. Sloane. You are its fever."
For the first time, Sloane looked almost amused.
"Every healthy body needs a fever now and then," he said. "Burns out infections, keeps the immune system attentive." He glanced at Cal. "Consider this, all of you. Today, your alien friend chose not to attack me while in pain and provocation. Good. I'll report that. I'll also report that he circumvented your most sacred law when it suited him, that he acted alone. The Council will tie itself in knots trying to square that circle." He took half a step backward, hands lifting in a caricature of surrender. "I will, of course, cooperate fully with any investigation." The lights flickered. Just for a heartbeat, Cal heard, under the pulse of the station, the distinctive whine of a transporter operating on a frequency just out of phase with Starfleet standard. When the lights came back solid, Sloane was gone. The device still glowed. The injector was still in Cal's hand. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and something like satisfaction. Sisko stared at the empty spot where Sloane had been, then swore under his breath in a language the universal translator politely refused to pass. "Computer," he snapped, "locate Luther Sloane." "There is no Starfleet officer by that name currently aboard the station," the computer replied blandly. "Of course not," Sisko muttered. Picard looked at Cal. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question was simple. The weight behind it wasn't. Cal nodded, even though his muscles still hummed from the kryptonite. "I've had worse," he said, "usually with less conversation." They studied the device for a long moment. Finally, Picard said, "We'll take it apart, learn what we can."
"Then get rid of it." Sisko's jaw set. "Not in my station," he said. "We analyze it on the Enterprise. Then we launch it into a star. I don't want that thing anywhere near Bajor." They did. Data dissected the crystal's structure, mapped its emission spectrum, confirmed that, yes, Starfleet now possessed a blueprint for hurting a Kryptonian. Picard authorized one copy of the data, sealed under his command codes and a few others he trusted. Then they took the crystal in a small shuttle and fed it to the nearest star. Cal watched from the cockpit as the green point vanished into the bright. It didn't make him feel as safe as he'd hoped. "You could have kept it," he said quietly, "just in case." Picard didn't take his eyes off the flare. "If I ever choose the safety of having a weapon against you over the trust we've built," he said, "I will have become the kind of man I've spent my life arguing against. I am old enough to know how fear dresses itself up as prudence. I'd rather risk being wrong about you than right about that." Warmth flickered in Cal's chest, cutting through the residual ache. "You know that makes you dangerous too, right?" he said. "And probably a nightmare for Section 31. "Good," Picard said. "Let them lose sleep for once."
Later, back on DS9, he found Picard and Sisko at one of the upper windows, looking out at the wormhole as it irised open and closed. The station hummed around them, busy, fragile, stubborn. Kal joined them without a word. For a moment, the three of them just stared at the swirl of light. "Sloan will be back," Sisko said eventually. "Men like that always are. You shine a light on one angle, they change the angle." "He already got what he wanted," Kal said. "Data on how much kryptonite it takes to drop me. Confirmation that I'll break rules if I think it saves lives. Proof that I won't break him even when he deserves it. It's enough for a dozen contingency plans." Picard's reflection in the glass looked tired.
"He also exposed himself," he said. "Not as much as I'd like, but enough. There are more of us than there are of him. If we remember that, his kind stays in the shadows instead of taking the bridge." "You really think this place is held together by people like you?" Kal asked. "Officers with ideals and tea rituals?"
"I think it's held together by arguments," Picard said. "By people who care enough to fight over what the Federation should be. Without that, Sloan wins by default."
Sisko nodded, arms folded. "The war taught me something," he said. "You can't fight monsters without getting some on you. The trick is remembering which stains are from necessity and which are from convenience. Section 31 stopped asking that question a long time ago." Kal let his hearing drift just for a moment back toward Viridia. The coughing hadn't vanished. It wouldn't, not for a while, but the rhythm had changed. There were more breaths that made it to the end, more heartbeats that didn't stumble. He heard someone laugh in the rain, the sound surprised and a little hysterical. He heard a girl tell her sick brother that the sky had forgiven them. "They're surviving," he said softly. "Not because of me. Because their bodies finally got a chance to do what they were always capable of." Picard glanced at him. "That's the best kind of intervention," he said. "The kind that lets people believe they saved themselves." "Back home," Kal said, "I used to think the fight was simple. Punch the bad guy, save the train, stop the bomb. Then I met men who could change the world with a pen and a lie. Here, the ones I can't hit are the ones who scare me." "Quads of us," Sisko said. "The enemy is not just ships and teeth. It's the idea that safety is worth whatever it costs someone else. That's the shadow under our flag." The wormhole flared, then closed, leaving the stars looking dimmer by comparison. Kal thought of Data in the lab, still chasing a door back to a sky with one yellow sun.
He thought of Martha's hands on his shoulders, of Lois's voice cutting through city noise, of a world that might already be a story he'd tell himself to stay sane. "If I get home," he said quietly, "I'm not sure what I'll tell them about this place. That it's what we could be if we learned to cooperate. Or that it's what we might become if we start believing our own myths about being the good guys." "Tell them we tried," Picard said. "Tell them we argued. Tell them we didn't always live up to what we said we were. But we didn't stop saying it." He paused. "And tell them about the man who refused to be a god in a universe that kept trying to make him one." Kal watched the stars. Somewhere behind and ahead of them, Borg cubes drifted in pieces. Romulan strategists recalculated. Section 31 wrote new scenarios. Somewhere, Viridia reigned,
and people sang to a sky that had finally given them something other than indifference. Somewhere, a farm in Kansas waited, maybe, for a son who'd gone to fix a tractor and never came back. The portal research would continue. Data would chase numbers. The admirals would debate. Sloane would lurk. He'd keep listening. He'd keep choosing. "Perfection's a lie," he said, more to himself than to the others. "All we get is shadows and light, fighting over the same patch of ground." He let his hands rest on the rail, feeling the faint vibration of the station. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see how much of the light we can keep."
The Badlands looked like a place the universe had tried to erase and given up on halfway through. From the Enterprise's forward view screen, the nebula was all torn light and seething clouds, rivers of plasma twisting in slow fury around dark pockets where sensors came back with nothing but static. Lightning crawled through the murk, silent in the vacuum, making whole regions strobe between night and a false, violent dawn. It reminded Cal of storm fronts rolling over Kansas fields, multiplied 1,000 times and stripped of anything that could be called kind. Somewhere inside that chaos, a set of coordinates glowed on the tactical display. The eye of the maelstrom, where the dimensional resonator would either do the impossible or tear itself to pieces trying. In the bowels of the ship, in a cargo bay turned shrine to dangerous ingenuity, the resonator waited. It wasn't pretty. A web of emitters and coils wrapped around a crystalline core, patched with last-minute modifications. It looked more like something a desperate engineer had cobbled together from half-remembered equations than a doorway home. When Cal laid his hand on its main housing, he could feel the hum of contained potential, a vibration that set some deep part of him on edge, as if his cells remembered what it felt like to fall out of a breach in reality. Geordie stood nearby with a pad, eyes flicking between readouts and the machine, expression equal parts pride and anxiety. "We're threading a needle in a hurricane," he said. "Badlands give us the plasma we need to mask the energy spike from half the quadrant, but they also give us turbulence that makes a starship's inertial dampeners weep." On the positive side, Data added from the other side of the device, if we are destroyed, the explosion will be spectacular, at least for a few nanoseconds. Geordie snorted. "You've been hanging around him too much," he said, nodding at Cal. "The deadpan is contagious." Cal smiled, then reached into the inner pocket of his uniform jacket. "I have something for you," he said to Data. He drew out a crystal the size of his thumb, faceted, faintly luminous even in the cargo bay's bright lights. It didn't match any Federation design, its geometry too elegant, like it had grown rather than been cut. Data's head tilted. "Is that Kryptonian?" he asked, voice a shade softer. "A data crystal," Cal said. "Non-military archives. My father encoded the basic science and ethics curricula he taught in our home city into a set of these. Or so the ship's AI told me. Physics, medicine, philosophy. Not weapons, not tactics. Just how we thought about the universe and our place in it. I can't take this ship with me, but I can leave you this." He held it out. For a second, something like hesitation flickered across Data's face.
as if he understood the intimacy of the gesture. Then he took the crystal with both hands as carefully as if it were an infant. "I am honored," he said. "I will ensure it is preserved and studied appropriately, and that it is not used to build a better bomb. Make sure they read the ethics before the engineering," Kal said. "We were arrogant, but we tried not to be careless." Data's fingers closed around the crystal. "I believe," he said, "that you underestimate the value of what you call arrogance. You looked at the cosmos and assumed you had a responsibility to it. That is rare." Kal shrugged one shoulder. "Back home, when my dad taught me how to fix a fence, he always said, if you're strong enough to bend the post, you're strong enough to set it straight. It's more or less the same thing in a different accent." "Clark," Geordie said quietly, "once this thing is on, there's no guarantee it's two-way. You understand that, right? If we lose the anchor, you could be stuck between." "Story of my life," Kal answered lightly. "Don't worry, I'll keep a hand on the right side until it closes." The joke didn't land.
They all understood what he was really saying. If something had to break, it would be him, not the ship. On the bridge, the air had the taste it always had before the edge of something big. Dry, thin, carrying the electric tension of a crew trying to be nothing but professional. Picard sat in the centre seat, posture straight, eyes on the screen. Riker beside him, Worf at tactical, Crusher at the medical console because she refused to be anywhere else. Kal stood by the aft rail, behind the command chairs, where he could see both the storm ahead and the faces around him. "Position?" Picard asked. "Approaching target coordinates," Data replied from Ops. "Badlands plasma activity at 93% of predicted values. Turbulence increasing. Shields holding at 87%. "This is as far as we can take her in safely," Riker said. "Any deeper and the plasma wakes are going to start chewing at the hull." Picard nodded, then turned in his chair to look up at Kal. Their eyes met, and for a moment the bridge and the storm and the hum of instruments dropped away. "We're here because we made a promise," Picard said. "To you and to ourselves. If at any point you feel this is too dangerous..." Kal shook his head. "Jean-Luc," he said, using the name more than the rank because anything else felt wrong now. "Dangerous was waking up in a universe that wasn't mine and trusting strangers not to dissect me. This..." He nodded at the screen, at the roiling light. "This is a path home built by friends." The word sat between them, solid. Picard inclined his head, some tension easing around his eyes. "Then let us be precise," he said. "Mr. Data, you and Mr. LaForge will coordinate activation from here and main engineering. Mr. Worf, keep the shields tuned to plasma frequency variants. I want as much of that chaos outside as possible. Mr. Crusher..." "I'll be ready," she said, "for the best or the worst." "And you," Picard said to Kal, "remember that you do not fly alone." Whatever happens in there, you are not leaving as a fugitive or a weapon. You are going because we chose to help you go. Kal swallowed. There it was again, the thing he had never quite known what to do with. Not adoration, not awe, just chosen, stubborn solidarity. "I know," he said. "For what it's worth, you made this universe a better detour." "We aim to be more than that,"
Picard said. It was his turn to look away first, back to the storm.
Helm, bring us to a full stop at the perimeter. All stop. Hold position.
The stars on the screen shuddered, then steadied as the Enterprise eased into the least unsteady pocket of the Badlands. When the resonator came online, the whole ship seemed to inhale. In engineering, Geordie's fingers flew over controls, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. "Initiating power transfer," he said. "Tapping warp core at 10%, 20, 30. Matter-antimatter reaction stable. Subspace harmonics within tolerance." On the bridge, the main view screen shimmered as something invisible flexed in front of them. Space, which normally wore its distances like a calm mask, developed a ripple, a bruise. Kal stepped forward, feeling it in his bones. A wrongness he recognized from the day he'd been torn here. Somewhere deep in the ship, the resonator's crystalline core began to sing. A high, thin tone that most of the crew couldn't hear, but set his teeth on edge. "Kal," Data said, turning his head, "we require a sustained infusion of energy at the frequencies corresponding to your native universe's solar spectrum. The resonator can handle the translation, but it cannot generate the initial amplitude on its own." "Translation," Geordie added over the comm. "We need you to be a sunbeam." "I can do that," Kal said. He moved toward the turbolift. Picard stood as if to say something, then stopped, the words exchanging themselves for something simpler. "Come back, if you can," he said. "If you cannot, go well." Kal nodded once, deeply.
Then let the lift doors close between them. In the shuttle bay, the doors opened onto a wall of orange and gold. The Enterprise's shields made the plasma sea outside look almost beautiful. A curtain of fire pushed back just enough for a small craft to squeeze through. Kal stepped up to the edge, the force field humming inches from his face. "Bay control," he said. "Drop field on my mark." "You're sure about this?" Geordie's voice came through, tinny but steady. "There's a reason we don't send people out there without a hull around them." "I'll complain to the Union when I get back," Kal said. He rolled his shoulders once, the old habit of loosening muscles, even though all it changed was his own focus. Then whispered, "Mark." The field flickered off. For a heartbeat, there was nothing between him and the Badlands, but cold vacuum and incandescent fury. Then he stepped forward and let the universe take him. Being in the storm was like swimming in molten glass. Plasma snarled around him, tongues of charged particles lashing at his skin with all the mindless rage of a river in flood. The energy content was staggering. Even through the pain, he could feel photons saturating him, filling every cell with the taste of home. Yellow sun filtered through something feral. He raised his hands, not to push the storm back, but to drink from it, to pull it in and channel it along vectors Data had given him. This angle, this modulation, this pulsed rhythm. Light spilled from his eyes, his chest, every pore, converging into a coherent stream that speared back toward the Enterprise, through its hull, into the waiting mouth of the resonator. In engineering, the main display spiked. "We're getting it," Geordie said, wonder edging his voice. "Power levels at 200% are predicted. Resonator core stable." "She likes him." "Dimensional gradient forming," Data reported. "Localized stress on space-time fabric at target coordinates. Visual impact on view screen in 3, 2, 1. On the bridge, space in front of the ship folded like a curtain caught in a wind from nowhere. A tear appeared, thin and black, then widened, edges glowing with a light that had no clear colour, only intensity. Behind it, something, a glimpse of another sky, blue and gold and wrong in all the right ways. The portal wavered, then held. "We are seeing a breach," Data said. "Destination signature is consistent with prior scans of the anomaly that brought Kal-El to us. I estimate a 78% probability that this leads to his original universe."
"Not exactly odds I'd bet my ship on," Riker muttered. Picard's fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. "Mr. Worf, any sign of other vessels?" he asked. Worf's brow ridges drew together.
"Negative, Captain," he said. "Sensors are—"
His hands flew over controls.
"Correction. Multiple contacts decloaking, bearing 010 Mark III. Range close."
The view screen split, part still showing the portal, part shifting to reveal the new arrivals. They were small and lethal. Angular hulls bristling with weapon ports, hull plating a shade darker than the surrounding void. Defiant class, or something like it, but with a few differences Geordie would have noticed immediately. Extra emitters, non-standard energy signatures, the subtle asymmetries of ships built off the books. A dozen of them, forming a tightening noose. In the centre, a larger ship, uglier, more heavily armoured, its registry markings scrambled. On the main screen, its image zoomed in. Sloane's voice came over an open channel before anyone hailed him. "Captain Picard," he said, smooth as ever. "This region is now under the authority of Section 31. You are ordered to power down your resonator, stand down your engines, and surrender your asset." Picard's jaw clenched. "This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Enterprise," he said, tone icy.
"You have violated about 15 different Federation protocols by bringing a cloaked fleet into a restricted nebula and interfering with a sanctioned scientific operation. Whatever shadow you hide in, you do not have the authority you claim."
Sloane appeared on the screen, seated in his command chair, background dim. His face was calm, eyes bright. "Authority is a matter of necessity," he said, "and necessity is very clear. Kal-El is classified as an Omega-level strategic resource. His departure constitutes an unacceptable risk to the security of this Federation. Stand down, or I will be forced to treat your ship as compromised." Worf growled low in his throat. "They are arming torpedoes," he said. "Signatures match. Unknown radiation, not standard photon or quantum." Cal's voice came through on the internal comm, tinged with static from the storm. "Jean-Luc," he said, "we have company." Picard didn't look away from Sloane. "You already have a risk," he said coldly. "It sits in your command chair, holding a dagger at the Federation's throat. You will not fire on this ship." "I already have," Sloane replied, almost gently. "Mr. Worf?" Worf's hands moved. "Incoming," he said. "Multiple warheads, vectoring not at us, but at Kal-El's position." On the screen, the Defiant variants spat streaks of red that curved not toward the Enterprise's shields, but into the storm, homing on the brightest point. The man made of light, pouring himself into the resonator. In the Badlands, Kal saw them as new stars, their warheads wrapped in a corona of unfamiliar radiation. He didn't need Data's analysis to know what it was. He could feel it already, a sickening note under the song of the yellow light.
red, cold and devouring, tuned to frequencies his cells remembered as hunger and weakness. The first torpedo detonated near him. It was like being plunged into ice. The yellow sun energy he'd been absorbing stuttered, flipped, turned to lead in his veins. He gasped.
The sound lost in the plasma, and the stream of light feeding the resonator flickered. On the bridge, alarms bloomed.
Resonator power levels dropping, Data snapped. Dimensional aperture destabilizing.
"Shields!" Picard barked. "Holding," Worf said. "But we cannot intercept the Red Sun warheads without exposing the hull. Their targeting is precise." On Sloane's ship, the man watched his screens with a surgeon's detachment. "Stand by for capture," he said to someone off-screen. "He'll be weak now. A boarding team with calibrated emitters should—" Cal hung in the storm, limbs heavy, vision dimming as the red radiation gnawed at the soda reservoir in his cells. For a fraction of a second, he considered letting it take him, letting the portal collapse, the resonator fail, the whole mad attempt dissolve into regret. He was tired. Tired of being a variable in other people's equations, tired of being the fulcrum on which entire worlds teetered. Then he heard the Enterprise scream. Not in metal, though the ship did groan as plasma sheared against its shields under Defiant-class fire, but in heartbeats, voices. The coordinated, terrified courage of 1,000 people trying to keep a too small hull from being a coffin. He heard Picard giving calm orders over a storm of alerts. Worf's bones-deep fury. Geordi muttering encouragement to a machine. Crusher already prepping triage for casualties that hadn't happened yet, but would. He heard them, and behind their sound another voice, quieter but anchoring. Jonathan Kent saying, "If you're strong enough to push the plow, boy, you're strong enough to pull someone out of the mud." The portal flickered, its edges fraying. If it collapsed now, the feedback could gut the Enterprise. If it remained open without control, it could widen and tear a hole big enough to swallow half this region. Either way, people died. The storm roared around him, not caring. He dragged in a breath that felt like rust and grit his teeth.
"Data," he said over the link, voice rough. "What's the densest pocket of plasma out here?" Data's reply came without hesitation. He had been watching everything, as always. "Bearing 043 Mark II, 30 kilometers from your current position," he said. "Local flux density exceeds ambient by a factor of—" "Good," Kal said. He turned toward it, every movement a fight, and flew. The plasma wall he slammed into made the earlier currents feel like a warm bath. This was a storm within the storm, a knot where energies collided and piled on each other until they boiled. He dove into it like a swimmer into surf, arms crossing in front of his face, eyes squeezed shut. It felt like being flayed. The red sun radiation in his system tried to clamp down, to smother his cell's ability to metabolize the yellow light burning all around him. He didn't give it the choice. He forced every muscle to open, to drink, to pull the storm in until his nerves screamed and the world narrowed to white pain. He remembered, distantly, a conversation with Data about thresholds, about how even Kryptonian tissue had limits. He pushed past what he thought his were. Somewhere behind him, the resonator's song rose again, fed now not by a steady stream but by a flood. The portal tore wider, edges brightening to a painful brilliance. On the bridge, the main view screen overloaded for a second before filters compensated. "Energy spike off the charts,"
Geordie shouted. "He's pulling from the storm directly. I don't know how he's not—"
"Disintegrating," Riker supplied. "Probably by refusing to." On Sloane's ship, consoles flared with new data. "His output just jumped an order of magnitude," an officer said sharply. "Red sun saturation declining." Sloane's lips thinned. "Increase bombardment," he snapped. "Target the Enterprise's shields. Force them to choose between protecting him and protecting themselves." The defiant variants obeyed.
Blue-white lances of torpedo fire and phaser bursts slammed into the Enterprise's shimmering bubble, making it flicker and flare. On the bridge, panels blew out, sparks raining. People staggered and caught themselves.
"Shields at 60%, Worf barked.
55. Captain, we cannot maintain this level of exposure.
"We're not leaving him," Picard said. "We came together. We go together, or not at all."
He stared at the storm, at the tiny, too bright point within it.
"But we are not helpless. Mr. Worf, target their sensor arrays. Cripple their eyes. Mr. Data, see if you can feed them phantom warp signatures. If they must shoot at ghosts, let's choose them." The Enterprise fought back, not as a predator, but as a porcupine, jamming, blinding, dodging as much as its bulk allowed. Still, the blows landed. Decks shuddered. Somewhere, a structural brace gave way with a noise like a giant bone breaking. In the heart of the Badlands, Kal hit his limit, and then stepped over it. The storm, which had been an enemy, became something else. A medium, a current he could ride. The red sun radiation burned out under the onslaught of fresher, cleaner energy. Every cell in his body lit like a filament. For a heartbeat, he was nothing but light wrapped in the idea of a man. He burst out of the plasma knot like a bullet, leaving a wake of cooler, tamed currents behind him. The Badlands howled. He ignored them. The first Section 31 ship never saw him coming. One moment it was angling for a better shot. The next, it was staring down the approaching blur of a red and blue shape, eyes glowing like small suns. Kal stopped in the vacuum between the Black Fleet and the Enterprise, arms spread, cape snapping in a wind that didn't exist here. For a fraction of a second, everything paused. Torpedo trails hanging, plasma lightning caught mid-fork, the portal flickering behind him like an open wound between realities. In Sloane's command center, people froze as their screens registered an energy signature off their charts, centered on a single point: the man they'd tried to weaken.
"Last chance," Kal said, not bothering with comm channels. He knew Sloane had ears everywhere. His voice carried through the electromagnetic noise and amplitude modulation on the chaos. "Stand down." Sloane stared at the sensor display, at the profile of a being his models said should be lethargic and weak. "Fire," he said. Every Section 31 vessel discharged weapons at once. In that same heartbeat, Kal brought his hands together. The sound of his clap had nowhere to go in the vacuum. Nowhere but into the medium he chose. His palms met with a force that would have shattered mountains back home. The impact generated a pressure wave in the charged particles around him, a tsunami in the plasma and the thin interstellar medium. The shock front rippled outward as a ring, faster than sound would have carried it in air, slower than light, but not by much. As it hit the incoming torpedoes,
delicate guidance systems fried. Warheads tumbled harmlessly, detonating early against nothing. As it slammed into the Defiant variant's hulls, very shields crackled, then collapsed under the sudden uniform stress. Electrical systems surged, overloaded, and died. On Sloane's bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The lights went out. Emergency backups kicked in, red and dim. Everywhere, the Black Fleet went dark, engines stuttering, weapons falling silent. Not one hull breached. Not one atmosphere vented. Every crew member lived, submerged in darkness and the sudden crippling vulnerability of a warship that had just had its teeth pulled out by a man who could have snapped its spine instead. Kal floated in the centre of the ring he had made, chest heaving once, twice. "You wanted a leash," he said into the silence. "Here's mine. I won't kill for you. I won't be what you think you need." Behind him,
The portal reacted to the energy discharge like a bell hit too hard. Its edges wobbled, then began to contract and expand in irregular pulses. The resonator whined like a straining engine. On the Enterprise, alarms jumped to fresh octaves. "Dimensional aperture destabilizing," Data said sharply. "The recent shockwave has introduced unforeseen variables into the space-time gradient. If the collapse is uncontrolled, the energies involved could pull us in." "Can we shut it down?" Picard asked. "We can attempt to reverse the resonator's polarity," Data said, fingers already moving. "But the portal is now self-sustaining to a degree. It is drawing power not only from our output, but from the surrounding subspace. Any attempt to sever our connection could cause a rebound effect." Geordie chimed in from engineering. "Captain, right now that thing is like a whirlpool. We're the rock it formed around. If we bail, it has nothing stable to close around. It could drag the whole area into a subspace sink." On the main screen, debris near the mouth of the portal had begun to drift inward, pulled by invisible tides. The Enterprise's hull vibrated, not from weapons now, but from the subtle, horrifying tug of raw physics reaching for mass. "Impulse engines full reverse," Picard ordered. "All power to shields and thrusters." The ship groaned, straining like a living thing. They moved, barely. Not enough. "Options?" Riker demanded. "Suggestions that don't involve get torn to atoms." Data's hands stilled on his panel for a fraction of a second. That strange, almost human pause he made when he had calculated something he didn't like. "The portal's instability revolves around a lack of fixed anchor points on both sides," he said. "On our side, the Enterprise fulfills that function partially, but our mass and structural integrity are insufficient to counteract the growing gradient. On the other side..." "There's nothing," Geordie said. "Vacuum. Whatever's waiting for him." Data nodded. "However," he went on, "if an object with sufficient resilience and control were to enter the portal and establish an anchor on the far side, it could, theoretically, create a fixed reference, allowing the aperture to collapse in a controlled manner around its axis instead of along our hull. The energy would be redirected into closing the breach rather than expanding it." Riker stared. "You mean somebody has to go in there and hold the door shut from the other side?" he said. "For good." Data did not look towards the aft rail. He didn't need to. Everyone knew where that line led. Kal's voice came over the internal comm, steady now.
burnished by what he'd just done. "Data," he said, "what happens to the anchor?" Data's hands tightened on the console. When he answered, his tone was very precise. "The gravitational and temporal shear within the collapsing aperture would be extreme," he said. "Even your physiology might not survive intact. At best, you would be separated from us. Permanently." There was a brief silence. On the bridge, Picard's fists clenched on the arms of his chair. "You do not have to do this," he said, knowing he was speaking into a channel that carried to more than the man he addressed. "We will find another way." "Jean-Luc," Kal replied, "if you had another way, Data would have given you 3 by now." The ship shuddered again, lights flickering. On the screen, the Black Fleet hung helpless, their crews silently watching the same nightmare. "You got me this far," Kal said. "You built me a door. Let me close it right." Picard stood up, turning to look at the blank space where the turbolift doors hid the way to the shuttle bay, as if he could glare through bulkheads. "I will not order you to your death," he said. "Good," Kal said softly. "Then this one's not on you." He cut the external comm and opened a narrowband link to the bridge only. "Put me on screen," he said, "just for a second." The image that snapped onto the main view screen flickered,
full of static and distortion. Kal hovered at the edge of the portal, half his body already tinged by its unearthly light. Behind him, the other universe bled through in glimpses. A blue sky, a hint of sunlight that hit his face at an angle the Enterprise's sensors couldn't pass. His hair whipped about as if in some fierce wind. The portal's edge crawled over his shoulder like a living horizon, trying to claim him. For just a moment, everything aligned. Picard looked up into his face. Kal looked back. The bridge fell away, the storm, the alarms. There was just the connection between 2 men who had more in common than either had expected when one of them fell out of a tear in space. They didn't say, "Thank you." That felt too small. They didn't say, "Goodbye." That felt too final. Picard swallowed. "Sometimes," he said, voice low but clear, "the universe offers us a choice between cynicism and faith. You have consistently refused to take the easy, cynical path. You have taught us that hope does not require miracles, only decisions, only the will to make the right choice when it costs us." Kal's throat worked. Around him, the portal's drag increased. His image jittered slightly. "Where I'm from," he said, "we used to say that the S on my chest stood for hope. I never really believed it. It always felt presumptuous. Out here with you, I saw what it looks like when hope is written into a charter instead of one man's symbol. Don't let men like Sloane erase that." Picard's eyes shone. "We won't," he said. "On my honor, we will remember, not just what you did, but why you did it." Behind him, on the bridge, people watched with expressions rarely seen on duty. Raw,
unfiltered emotion. Data's hands rested unmoving on his console, as if he knew he would remember this down to the microsecond. Worf stood straighter, as if saluting something deeper than rank. Crusher's lips pressed together, a doctor watching a patient choose his own end for reasons she respected and hated.
Kal's gaze took them all in. "Tell Data to look for the stars in my sky that match yours," he said with a small, crooked smile. "Maybe one night, when we're both looking up, we'll be staring at the same place from different sides. That's close enough." "Clark," Picard said, and there was more in the simple name than any title. "Go home." Kal nodded once, then turned. The last thing they saw was the symbol on his back, red against the shifting light, as he flew into the heart of the portal. The collapse was not an explosion. It was a closing hand. The portal's edges, which had been ragged and flickering, suddenly sharpened as if deciding on a purpose. The pull on the Enterprise increased for one terrifying instant, making the hull groan and the deck plates vibrate underfoot. Then, as Data's calculations took hold and Kal's presence on the other side provided the anchor the equations demanded, the forces reoriented. Instead of dragging the ship in, they spiraled inward along the axis where a Kryptonian body now served as fulcrum. On the screen, the tear narrowed, its brightness intensifying as all the stolen energies rushed to reincorporate themselves into a coherent fabric. For a moment, in the heart of the light, a small silhouette hung motionless, arms spread, as if holding two universes apart. Then the aperture winked out. The resonance died. The Badlands were just storms again. The Enterprise drifted, battered but whole. Silence fell on the bridge, broken only by the soft beeping of systems returning from the brink. "Structural integrity field holding," Data said quietly. "Shields at 30%. All major systems functional. The portal is gone." "Any sign of him?" Riker asked, though he knew. Data's eyes flickered over the sensors, then closed briefly in a gesture he hadn't learned from any programming. "No," he said. Picard sat down slowly as if his legs had remembered gravity. He looked at the place on the view screen where the portal had been. Where a man from another story had just made himself a hinge in a cosmic door. "Mr. Worf," he said eventually, voice level. "Status of the Section 31 fleet."
Worf's gaze hardened as his console relayed the picture.
"Their vessels are disabled," he said. "Systems offline. Life support stable. No fatal casualties reported. They are at our mercy."
Riker's jaw clenched. "Good," he said. "About time that equation ran in our favor." Picard watched the dark shapes in the storm adrift, fanged and toothless. "Transmit to Starfleet Command," he said. "Priority 1. Inform them that Luther Sloan and a clandestine fleet under his control have engaged in unauthorized hostile actions against the Enterprise, attempted to capture a protected individual, and endangered a major scientific operation. Attach all sensor logs. Recommend immediate detainment of all vessels for investigation on charges of treason."
"Aye, sir,"
Worf said, with a grim satisfaction that nearly concealed the ache under it. In the weeks that followed, the political storm in the wake of the Badlands incident was almost as fierce as the plasma one. Section 31, long a rumour and a ghost, suddenly had hulls and names on record.
Admirals who had sworn they knew nothing found their signatures on authorizations they'd signed without reading too closely. Sloane himself was pulled from whatever bolt hole his emergency transport had dumped him in by a combined effort of Cisco, Starfleet security, and a handful of very angry captains who resented being used as unwitting cover for a shadow war. He went quietly when the cuffs finally closed around his wrists, eyes reflecting an unreadable mix of annoyance and tired amusement. "You're making a mistake," he told the tribunal later. "The universe does not reward noble gestures. It punishes them." Picard, called as a witness, met his gaze and thought of a man clapping his hands in a storm to disable a fleet without killing a soul. "Sometimes," he said,
"it rewards them by proving you wrong."
Sloane was convicted on multiple counts of conspiracy, unauthorized use of Federation assets, attempted kidnapping, and actions endangering Federation citizens and vessels. He smiled when they read the verdict, as if amused by the idea that one man's fall could excise the sickness he represented. Maybe he was right. Institutions didn't change because a single shadow was dragged into the light. But they sometimes shifted because enough people in enough rooms remembered what it had felt like to stand on a bridge and watch someone they owed nothing to risk everything for an ideal they claimed as their own. Months later, in a city that had never heard of warp drive or subspace or the Prime Directive, a man in glasses sat at his desk in the bullpen of the Daily Planet and tried to find the first sentence. The newsroom sounded pleasantly mundane. Clacking keys, ringing phones, Perry White barking about deadlines in an office that had seen too many coffee stains and Pulitzer dreams. Clark Kent hunched over his computer, tie slightly askew, hair doing its usual rebellion against neatness. On the screen in front of him, the headline field blinked. "The ship without a cape." He smirked at it, deleted it, typed it again. Hard to talk about a starship in a universe that didn't have the language for it. Harder still to talk about what it had taught him, without sounding like he'd finally lost the thin grip on normalcy he pretended to maintain. The official story he'd tell, if anyone asked where he'd been, involved a collapsed building, trapped miners, and a few days out of touch in a disaster zone far away. Lois would narrow her eyes, see the seams in it, and decide whether to press. She always could smell when the truth was bigger than the words. The article he was actually writing would look, to anyone else, like a think piece about power and responsibility in a world of growing metahumans, vigilantes, gods in everything but name,
Nations scrambling to keep up. He'd frame it as a cautionary tale against secret organizations that claimed to act in humanity's name while fearing it too much to trust it. He wouldn't mention starfields or French captains or androids with kind eyes. He'd talk about a hypothetical. What if there were a place where exploration, not domination, was the guiding principle? What if its greatest danger came not from aliens at the gate, but from the fear of losing control from within? Somewhere, people needed to hear that story, even if they thought he was making it up. His fingers moved, words unspooling. "In any universe," he typed, "the greatest threat to a hopeful project isn't the enemy at the border. It's the belief that hope alone is naive, that ideals must always bow to necessary evils. The moment we accept that, we stop being better than what we fight." He paused, staring at the sentence, then added almost without thinking, "I've seen a crew fly into storms for someone they could have reasonably called a threat.
They chose otherwise. We can too. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes behind the glasses, and let his gaze wander to the windows. Metropolis's night sky was always a little hazy from light pollution, but tonight a single streak cut through it, a meteor burning briefly against the dark. For a second, his breath caught. It was nothing more than a rock, a bit of space debris hitting atmosphere at the wrong angle. But the way it moved, straight and sure, made something in his chest tighten with an almost physical ache. He smiled, small and private. "Good hunting, Captain," he murmured. "Wherever you're pointing her." On the Enterprise, stars slid by as they always had, indifferent and magnificent. The ship continued, because that was what it did. There were charts to update, anomalies to catalogue, people to rescue. The warp core hummed its familiar note. In the ready room, Picard sat with a cup of Earl Grey cooling slowly in his hands.
He'd been staring at the same sector map for 10 minutes without seeing it. His gaze kept drifting to the curved window, to the starfield beyond.
A chime sounded. "Come," he said. Data stepped in, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that had become more human over the years as he unconsciously mimicked those he respected. "Captain," he said, "I wished to inform you of a development from Starfleet Academy." Picard gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "By all means," he said. "Sit, if you wish." Data sat. It was still a slightly awkward motion, like a man wearing a new suit of clothes, but it was progress. "The Kryptonian data crystal you entrusted to my care has been successfully decoded and integrated into the Academy's curriculum," he said. "Specifically, the ethics modules, comparative cultural philosophy, and advanced xenocultural jurisprudence. They are calling it the Kryptonian Code." Something warm flickered at the corner of Picard's mouth. "A bit dramatic," he said. But then, so was he. "The cadets seem engaged," Data said. "Feedback indicates they find the Kryptonian approach to power and restraint challenging and inspiring. There is particular interest in the notion that any individual who possesses extraordinary capability is obligated to see themselves as a servant rather than a ruler." He tilted his head. "They also seem to appreciate the metaphor of fixing fences as an ethical framework." Picard chuckled. "Simple images travel further than complex treatises," he said. "We philosophers dress the same truths up in heavier language, but in the end, it all comes down to choosing to mend rather than break." He looked down at his tea, then back up at Data. "Do they know where it came from?" "Only in broad terms," Data said. "The materials are attributed to an anonymous extraterrestrial civilization that destroyed itself through hubris, but left behind valuable insights."
Starfleet Command felt that naming Kal-El specifically might lead to unhealthy hero worship.
"Perhaps," Picard said. He thought of the insignia on that chest, of how easily it could have become an idol instead of a reminder. "Maybe it's better this way. Let the ideas stand on their own." Data hesitated. "Do you miss him?" he asked. It was a blunt question, almost childlike, but there was depth under it. Picard leaned back, considering. "I don't miss the weapon," he said slowly, "because that was never what he was to me. I miss the man who sat at that station." He nodded toward the science console, "and argued with me about the Prime Directive until we both realized how much of ourselves we were afraid of. I miss the way he reminded me that our uniforms are only as meaningful as the choices we make in them." He looked at Data. "Do you
Data's gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, then rose again. "I find myself," he said, "running simulations of conversations we did not have, wondering what he would say about new situations. That is similar, I believe, to what humans describe as missing someone." Picard smiled gently. "Then yes," he said, "you miss him." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two beings made of different matter bound by the same absence. Outside, the stars glided on. "There is one more thing," Data said. "Last night, in the Academy's astronomy lab, several cadets reported seeing an unusual meteor in the night sky over Earth. Their descriptions match a Class 3 object entering atmosphere at an angle consistent with normal debris. However, one cadet chose to annotate her report with a note. For a second, it looked like a ship changing course." Picard's eyebrows rose. "Superstition?" he asked. "Symbolism," Data corrected. "Or perhaps merely a desire to connect two otherwise unrelated phenomena." He paused. "Do you think it is inappropriate, Captain, that I sometimes choose to allow such interpretations to stand?"
Even when the data does not support them. Picard's eyes crinkled. "Data," he said, "we command a vessel whose very mission statement assumes that there is meaning in going out there to see what's beyond the next star. A little poetry in our reports is not a crime." He lifted his cup, now lukewarm, and took a sip anyway. "We cannot know what became of him," he went on, "but we can choose how to let his passage change us. That is, in the end, the only part of any story we truly own." Data nodded slowly, as if saving the sentence for later analysis. "Then I will leave the cadet's note," he said. "It seems fitting." An alert chimed softly from the bridge. "Captain," came the voice of the duty officer over the intercom, "we are approaching the coordinates for the next survey mission." Picard set his cup down and stood, smoothing his uniform. The ache was still there, it would be for a while, but it sat alongside something steadier. The knowledge that the line they walked now had been tested and found worth the hurt. "On my way," he said. He looked at Data. "Care to join me?" "Always, Captain," Data said, standing as well. They stepped out onto the bridge. The crew looked up to acknowledge their arrival, then back to their stations. Outside, a new sector awaited, full of unknowns and potential, and quiet dangers. Picard took the centre seat and let his hand rest for a second on the armrest, fingers tracing the familiar groove worn there by years of choices. "Set course," he said. "Warp 6. The stars on the screen shifted, aligning themselves along a new vector. "Engage." The Enterprise leaped forward, a streak of light against the dark, carrying with it, somewhere in its core, the echo of a thunderclap in a distant nebula, and the memory of a man who had stood between worlds and chosen, in the end, not to be a god, but a bridge. Somewhere, beyond whatever counted as an event horizon between universes, another sky arched over another world. A man in a cape listened to the hum of his city and smiled at the thought that, in some other story, a bald captain was doing the same with his ship. The fabric between them held. The door was closed. The connection remained, not in space or time, but in the stubborn, luminous insistence that hope was worth the risk of believing in it.